Our story begins with a girl urging her father to leave, assuring him that she is capable of earning her tuition fees on her own. However, her father expressed his hope that his lucky charm might bring them some good fortune, which left his daughter puzzled. She could only think to herself that it was merely an old coin. When they presented the piece to the pink-haired appraiser, she took it to examine it closely with a magnifying glass. The appraiser asked the man about the source of the coin, and he told her that he had obtained it a long time ago as a token of gratitude for saving someone from drowning. Then she caught him off guard with a precise question about whether the incident had occurred in the Calico Strait. The man was utterly astonished and confirmed her words, wondering how she could have known that. The appraiser returned the coin to them, explaining that she could not buy it, so the father accepted the matter with disappointment, as if he had fully expected it. Although the father saw this as confirmation that the coin was just a lucky charm, the appraiser cried out enthusiastically, rejecting the idea of them keeping it. At that point, the appraiser revealed the true reason for her refusal, showing them a newspaper clipping announcing that the value of this coin was 10 million gold pieces, and she urged them to hurry to the auction house immediately, leaving the father and daughter in a state of total shock. The father and daughter left the place, expressing their deep gratitude to the appraiser, who saw them off kindly. Later, while the appraiser was sipping tea, some ladies were whispering about her good reputation and honesty, and how her shop had become a destination for prominent figures such as the princess, the commander of the Holy Knights, the cardinal, and even a duke from a neighboring country. This response puzzled the ladies, who wondered if that didn't just make them annoying customers. The appraiser agreed with a smile, then began to explain how these annoying people became customers of her shop. She explained that understanding the story required going back in time, specifically to the moment she returned to life after dying in her previous life. She revealed that she is Elisha Raunit, and that she is now living her second life. She then began to recall memories of her first life, remembering a quiet day when she lived in peace with her grandfather. On that day, their tranquility was interrupted by a visitor, Count Hugo. The Count introduced himself to young Elisha as a distant relative of hers and her grandfather, which surprised her, as she had not known they had a noble relative. Elisha asked about her grandfather's whereabouts, and the Count reassured her that he had moved him to a large hospital in the capital, offering for her to accompany him so he could explain everything. In order to treat her grandfather, who was suffering from a rare disease that was gradually stripping away his memories, Elisha agreed to sign some papers, clinging to the hope of his recovery. The Count assured her that treating this disease required a lot of time and money. She watched helplessly as her grandfather's memories faded, confident that the Count was her savior. Feeling that she had met her deliverer, she handed him the signed papers without hesitation. After she completed the signing, she asked to see her grandfather, but she was surprised by the change in the Count's features. He looked at her with a cunning smile and asked what she was talking about, leaving her bewildered. Then the Count revealed the truth about the document, explaining that she had signed a contract stating that they would take full responsibility for her grandfather's care. He added that under the contract, she had to leave the empire immediately and forever. Thus, overnight, she found herself expelled from her home and homeland. The days following her settlement in the Duchy of Moro were harsh and difficult, as she was beaten by thieves who tried to steal her necklace. She was only saved from them by the arrival of guards who forced them to flee. Despite all this suffering, she endured every day thinking of her grandfather, holding on to the hope that he would soon regain his health. The girl found herself thrown on the ground, wounded and exhausted, yet she found some solace in having managed to protect the necklace her grandfather had given her. But this solace did not last long. Her eyes fell on a news report in a newspaper about the discovery of an unidentified body in a fire that broke out in a slum near the imperial capital. The newspaper revealed the identity of the victim, which was a horrific shock, as it turned out to be Michel Fouchidad Raunit, the former duke. The news also indicated that the Raunit family had begun procedures to sell the duke's property, including the pawn shop, and that inheritance procedures were moving smoothly. Her grandfather had died in a fire in a slum, something that had never crossed her mind, and she collapsed while reading the news with tearful eyes. She realized the bitter truth. Her grandfather was the former duke, and that was why they had targeted him. She began to blame herself for her naivety and stupidity. A bitter feeling of regret overwhelmed her because she had lost her grandfather due to a trick she had undoubtedly fallen for. She wished with all her heart that time would turn back just once. While she was in the depths of her despair, she heard an unknown voice describing her situation as pitiful. With the murmur of that mysterious voice, she opened her eyes again to find herself in a state of bewilderment. She woke up sitting in her bed, inside her familiar room, in a state of disbelief. She rushed out of the room, shouting for her grandfather with eagerness and despair. The grandfather, who was sleeping peacefully, was surprised by this loud intrusion. She stared at him in silence, unable to speak, while he looked at her in surprise, wondering about her identity. But soon his memory returned. He smiled and gently blamed her for her shouting, assuring her that he wasn't going anywhere. She was flooded with intense emotions as she whispered that this truly was her grandfather and that she wasn't dreaming. She threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly, and he asked her affectionately if she had seen a bad nightmare. She felt the warmth of his embrace and was certain she was not in a dream, that she had indeed returned. She suddenly asked him for today's date, which piqued his curiosity. She rushed to the calendar to discover that today was 3 days before that ill-fated day, the day Count Hugo appeared in her previous life. With a look full of determination, she swore she would protect her grandfather, the pawn shop, and her life, and that she would never allow them to be taken from her again. Her priority was dealing with Hugo, and 3 days later, while she was outside, the Count arrived as she had expected. She watched him approach, fully aware of why he had come. The Count stepped toward her, asking if she was Miss Elisha and if Uncle Michel was inside. She welcomed him and thanked him for visiting her grandfather. On the pretext that the paint inside had not yet dried, she invited him to sit at a table in the courtyard, preventing him from entering. Then Hugo presented the papers to her to convince her that her signature was necessary for her grandfather's treatment. Elisha took a pen out of her pocket, saying that the paint would take longer to dry, hinting at her plan. She cheerfully asked him to wait a bit before entering, while he looked at her with disdain, believing she was just a naive fool who knew nothing of the world. After a short wait, the Count ordered his attendant to go inside to check the house. However, when he reviewed the papers, the Count looked at them and was stunned by what he saw. Her signature had disappeared from the documents as if it had evaporated. He searched the papers eagerly for the transfer of rights contract, believing it to be his lifeline. But upon reading the contract, he discovered a catastrophic clause. It turned out that the mentioned property was nothing more than an old hut on the outskirts of the capital, burdened with a high-interest mortgage and accumulated debts reaching 30 million gold pieces. Count Hugo was deeply shocked as he read the details of the contract, falling into his seat in a state of bewilderment and staggering, unable to believe that he had become indebted for 30 million gold pieces at a high interest rate. His shock increased when his attendant rushed to tell him that Lord Michel was not inside the house, and the Count exploded in anger and surprise. The events go back a few days when Elisha went to a moneylender and asked for a loan of 30 million gold pieces, using the house as collateral, and insisted that the interest be at the maximum possible limit. The moneylender was surprised by the size of the amount and asked her if she was joking. Elisha replied firmly and confidently as she placed a bag on his table, asserting that she did not have the time or money for joking and that she needed the funds that same day. The moneylender pointed to the contract, explaining that the interest rate was insane. However, with a confident smile, she asked him to give her the maximum, justifying it by saying that she wouldn't be the one paying back this debt. Although the moneylender did not understand her plan, he found her an interesting girl, so he agreed to her request and asked her to sign. After securing the money, Elisha moved her grandfather to a luxurious hospital, where a nurse told her that a private room had been prepared for him and that all treatments would be provided at the highest level. Elisha set an additional and crucial condition, that absolutely no information regarding the patient be leaked to the outside. The head nurse reassured her, confirming that they always care for the security of their clients and would protect the confidentiality of the matter with their lives. Elisha looked at her grandfather resting in his bed and silently promised him that she would never let anyone hurt him again. Returning to the present, Count Hugo was trembling with rage as he tore the papers in his hands, cursing that girl who had tricked him in this way. He let out a loud cry of anger that shook the place, causing the birds to fly away in terror. Meanwhile, Elisha was wondering to herself if that scoundrel, Hugo, had figured it out by now. She then decided it was time to hurry to her grandfather's shop, realizing that a long time had passed since her last visit to Ashen Street. Elsewhere, a commander was receiving a report from his assistant stating that they had found traces of the sorcerer who stole the holy sword, and that the last place he was seen was on Ashen Street. The commander smiled craftily, noting the presence of a pawn shop on that street, describing it as the perfect place to dispose of stolen goods. Elisha returned to her shop and began noting down her future goals. Her first goal was to restore the Rawnit family name by uncovering the reason for her grandfather's expulsion from the duchy, clearing his name and restoring his honor. The second goal was to successfully manage the pawn shop and rebuild it as it was in her grandfather's era. The third goal was to find a cure for her grandfather, which required her to know the cause of his illness. She held her necklace with strength and determination, assuring herself that she was capable of achieving all of this, for she was his granddaughter after all. Standing in front of the shop door, she held a broom announcing the start of a new phase in her life. She began to work diligently and actively, cleaning, organizing, and receiving customers. Then she headed out carrying her official papers, considering them the final step toward a true and new beginning. However, she was shocked when her request was met with a flat refusal at the official office. She wondered in confusion about the reason, emphasizing that she had prepared everything, from the business plan to the financial management proposal, and even her own appraisal certificate. The official answered coldly that anyone could prepare papers and asked sarcastically if a beginner like her thought she was capable of managing a pawn shop on this street, accusing her of underestimating the difficulty of the matter. Elisha replied confidently that she was excellent at appraisal and asked not to be judged without a true knowledge of her abilities, so the official challenged her to prove it. She asked her to provide proof of her skill right then and there. Elisha simply picked up a gemstone and began examining it closely. After moments of examination, she announced confidently that the stone was a first-class ruby and that she was offering a purchase price of 1.5 million gold pieces. The official smiled slightly as if she had expected this exact response. The lady, named Helena, revealed that she had bought that ruby for 1,200,000 gold pieces and explained that given the estimated value, the correct offer should have been around 600 to 800,000 gold pieces only. She then scolded Elisha angrily, accusing her of trying to win her favor by offering a high price, and ordered her to give up the idea of work if she planned to manage it with flattery. While Helena continued her scolding, Elisha was calmly searching through her bag, unbothered by her words, until she finally found what she was looking for. She took out a newspaper and asked Mrs. Helena if she had seen today's edition, which piqued the latter's curiosity. Elisha pointed to news announcing that the Tejeta mine had been depleted yesterday, which meant the price of rubies would rise significantly due to their increasing rarity. She then explained her strategy. She could have pretended not to know the news and bought the stone at a low price, but she knew that Helena would discover the truth later, and thus she would lose her trust and never return to her shop again. Not stopping there, she pointed to the other stone on the table and confidently declared it a fake. Helena demanded proof of her claim, looking at her with a gaze of doubt and scrutiny. Elisha replied that the stone lacked the luster of a natural stone that can be recognized at first glance. And more importantly, the certificate of authentication attached to it was a template from the Atman Appraisal Office, which closed last year. She added that the date on the certificate was recent, proving it was forged, describing it as a common trick for beginners, which embarrassed Helena. After proving her worth, Elisha made a clever offer, suggesting to Helena that her shop display the real ruby for sale on a consignment basis, estimating its value at 2,400,000 gold pieces, and asserting that she could expect to get at least 2 million gold pieces. Helena sighed and then admitted that Elisha had prepared well. Elisha responded with a smile, emphasizing that customer trust was always her top priority. In the end, Helena was convinced and gave her final approval for the reopening of the Rawnit shop. The papers were stamped with approval, and Elisha left the place feeling victorious. Later, after a busy first day of the reopening, Elisha felt extremely exhausted as she leaned her head on the table. The consignment strategy had worked perfectly, as the shop was filled with customers who admired the high-quality goods she was able to display without needing to spend her own money. She stood up feeling satisfied, wishing her grandfather were here to see and rejoice in this success. As she stretched her arms, a strange scent of mint filled the place. Suddenly, she heard a masculine voice commenting on her busyness all day, wondering if business was good. She turned to find a strange man standing at the window smoking, wondering to herself if he had been watching her the whole time. She stepped toward him cautiously while hiding something behind her back, asking if she could help him, reminding him that this was her opening day. The man turned toward her, and she noticed the tattoo on his neck and the scar on his face. He asked if she was the owner of the shop, while she internally complimented his beauty. She confirmed that she was the owner, and the mysterious color of his eyes caught her attention. The man suddenly approached her to ask a shocking question, whether she traded in humans as well. She was astonished and asked him to clarify his meaning. He looked at her directly and asked her to buy him. She rejected his request flatly and decisively, explaining that her shop dealt in logic, so the answer was no. She tried to end the conversation by telling him she was closing the shop if he wasn't looking for something specific, but he stopped her, saying he was looking for a sword he hadn't found on the first floor. She told him that the weapons were kept on the second floor, and that according to the shop's policy, he had to describe the specifications of the sword he wanted so she could bring him a collection to choose from. The man began describing the sword he was looking for, explaining that it was a one-handed sword with a diamond-shaped blade, and its hilt was encrusted with pearls and other jewels. He added that there were marks on the blade, indicating its use, and then mentioned one more feature that was the most important of all. That feature was that the sword he was looking for was a stolen piece, which shocked Alicia. She responded to him with calmness and steadiness, asserting that he had come to the wrong shop and that they did not deal in stolen goods. He asked her sarcastically if she thought she was capable of distinguishing stolen items, admiring her great self-confidence. She explained their strict procedures, where every piece is checked 2 or 3 times using certificates, purchase receipts, and auction records. She continued that in the absence of a certificate, as is the case with dolls or books, the dialogue with the customer himself becomes the evidence. Details such as how they felt when they bought the piece, how much they cherish it, and the reason they are pawning it instead of selling it, all form a story that is difficult to fabricate. He interrupted her, mockingly asking if she didn't consider the possibility that all those receipts, records, and certificates might be forged, and that she might be being deceived. She replied that of course she thinks about that, and worries about it every day. Then she gave him an example, asking if a thief broke into a house secured with 3 locks. Would the mistake be that of the homeowner for not putting a 4th lock, or would it be the thief's fault? She added firmly that if a piece she appraised turned out to be stolen despite all her efforts, she would cooperate fully with investigations, but she would do so after catching the thief who hadn't arrived yet, whom she described as the customer. Suddenly, a strange feeling came over her, as if she had lived through this situation before. This hostile attitude toward pawn shops, the suspicion of stolen goods, and the talk of human trafficking. She interrupted him with a sudden question, asking if he was from the Duchy of Moro. He asked why she thought that, and she replied that she had heard rumors about what had happened at a pawn shop there a while ago. She recalled a memory from her previous life when she was looking for a job at a pawn shop in the Duchy of Moro, where someone advised her to give up because all the pawn shops there were closing their doors. The reason, as she was told, was that some criminals had exploited one of the shops a few years prior for all kinds of crimes, from smuggling and exorbitant usury to identity laundering and human trafficking. Since then, pawn shops had become illegal in the duchy. The man looked at her sharply and asked sternly about the source of this story and who had told her, but she jokingly backtracked, wondering why he was reacting so sensitively and if he had something to hide. Elisha linked his previous words, "Do you trade in humans?" and "What I am looking for is a stolen good." And suspicions began to haunt her that this man might be a criminal from the Duchy of Moro, who had come to test her to see if she would cooperate with him. She decided it was time to kick him out of her shop. With a forced smile, she asked if he was interested in her. The man was astonished and shocked by her sudden question. She continued with feigned seriousness that it was very annoying, wondering if he had fallen in love with her at first sight. She explained her conclusion by saying that his arrival after official working hours and his continuous questions about useless personal details made the matter clear. She told him that he couldn't have her for himself, and that her face, as he could see, was very popular, and that unfortunately he wasn't the only one who felt this way about her. Then, as if doing him a favor, she said she might show him some consideration. With a broad smile, she asked him to leave his business card. She promised him that if she came across a legal sword encrusted with pearls, she would contact him first. The man took a card out of his pocket and gave it to her, shaking his head in bewilderment, and she thanked him. She bid him farewell with over-enthusiasm, saying goodbye to Mr. Alter and adding that even if she were beautiful, he shouldn't come to see her every day, which piqued his annoyance and made him wonder why he felt angry. As he was leaving the place, he listened to Alicia as she realized his name was Alter. Alicia repeated the name Alter to herself, admiring its beauty, while Alter eavesdropped on what she said outside. Later, the identity of the sorcerer who stole the holy sword was revealed, Ivor. A year ago in the Duchy of Moro, Ivor was the sorcerer who single-handedly tracked down and captured the culprit behind a series of arsons that no one else could solve. Shortly after, he became one of the magical advisors to the duchy. Thanks to his kind demeanor, Ivor gained trust and praise equal to his skill. Everyone trusted Ivor until the day he suddenly disappeared after stealing a holy artifact. In the present, a commander was discussing with his assistant the owner of the pawn shop, who confidently claimed she did not deal in stolen goods, even after inhaling the magical smoke that forces people to tell the truth. The commander's assistant wondered if it was possible the shop was innocent, but the commander flatly denied it, confirming that the trace tracking device had reacted there, and that Ivor had definitely stopped at that shop. The assistant concluded enthusiastically that the place must be the middleman Ivor uses to sell his loot, and a source for money laundering, which the commander agreed with. But the commander wondered why that woman's words also seemed honest. As he thought about it, recalling her words when she said, "Altar is a beautiful name," he decided they must check the second floor themselves. Meanwhile, Alicia entered a sorcerer's shop. A woman greeted Alicia and said she had been waiting for her. The woman, who was Emma, the sorceress of Ashen Street, provided her with what she had requested. Alicia opened the box to find 2 necklaces of pure holy water, and she admired Emma's skill. Emma asked her about her plan for using the worst memory spell. Alicia replied that she would use it when needed. As Alicia was leaving, Emma remarked, describing her as a scary girl, while Alicia told herself that Hugo must be prepared because it was his turn to cry this time. Elsewhere, Hugo was walking anxiously, thinking about his uncle's precision and the possibility of him monitoring everything, but he dismissed the idea that he would hide in a pawn shop. His attendant rushed to tell him that Michelle was not in the shop, asserting that they had watched him for days and were absolutely sure he was there. Hugo felt relieved, considering this his chance to completely crush Alicia. He believed that if he scared her enough, she would listen to him. Hugo broke into the shop violently and asked her rudely if she knew why he had come, calling her a filthy fraud. Alicia pretended to be innocent and offered him tea to resolve any misunderstanding that might have occurred. He shouted at her angrily and ordered her to drink the tea first. She asked him why, and he replied sarcastically that if it were normal tea, there shouldn't be a problem. Hugo was stunned when Alicia raised the cup and drank from it. She explained to him that she had been scolded last time for offering hospitality to guests in the street, so this time she had prepared tea. Suddenly, Hugo froze in his place, unable to move. Alicia recalled in her mind the advice of her grandfather, who taught her how to serve guests, telling her to always be ready with a cup of tea to throw in their faces if things went wrong. The panicked Hugo asked who had scolded her, and she replied that she would be scolded again today, and that she drank the tea instead of pouring it on him because she was too weak to do so. Then Hugo asked in terror if his uncle knew about that day, and about her lying regarding his illness, wondering what was meant by the phrase, "again today," which left him terrified and confused. Hugo wondered in terror if his uncle had come to the place, as loud banging sounds began to echo around. The intensity of the violent sounds increased, making Hugo tremble and ask fearfully what that sound was. The girl answered him, feigning innocence while he stuttered from extreme fear. That sound brought to Hugo's mind a terrifying scene from the past. It was none other than the grandfather Duke, who appeared in a state of raging anger, knocking the guards to the ground with his powerful blows. The grandfather shouted in a loud, angry voice, wondering who had appeared behind him. Hugo was terrified by his uncle's fearsome aura, nearly losing consciousness. Back to the present, Hugo continued to tremble violently, while Alicia asked him maliciously why he was shaking, pretending to be worried about his condition. Hugo asked her if his uncle was testing a weapon at this time, while Alicia knew perfectly well that Hugo's worst nightmares and memories were embodied by her grandfather. She increased his panic by telling him that the grandfather held a grudge anyway, and that she tried to stop him, considering it lucky for him not to run into him today. Hugo asked in shock about the reason for that grudge. She explained to him that the grandfather was shouting, vowing that he would never forgive Hugo until he returned the Corona Forest painting. Hugo imagined the grandfather's angry face burning with fire behind her, unable to believe that all this anger was over a painting he considered worthless. No sooner did the sound of the grandfather's shouting reach his ears again, asking who was inside, than Hugo let out a scream, jumping from his place in a state of extreme terror. Hugo fled as fast as he could, vowing to return the painting immediately and begging her to tell her uncle so, while she bid him farewell with a broad smile and an innocent wave. As soon as he left, Alicia stood alone in the shop, a cunning and cynical smile playing on her lips. She took out a small perfume bottle and laughed victoriously, praising Emma the sorceress's skill. The magical tool that spreads a mist, triggering the worst memory and causing psychological shock to whoever inhales it, had worked perfectly. She stuck out her tongue sarcastically, noting that she knew that idiot wouldn't drink the tea, and explaining that what she had drunk earlier to dispel his suspicions was nothing but holy water. In magical rules, holy power cancels magic, and magic cancels holy power, as each erases the other. However, high-purity holy water has the ability to erase magic one-sidedly and completely. Alicia sighed as she looked at the holy water bottle, remembering its exorbitant cost and hoping she wouldn't have to use it much in the future. Nevertheless, she felt satisfied and reassured to have obtained it. Her smile faded when she thought of her own worst memory, which was embodied in the scene of the devastating fire and the loss of her grandfather, a cruel memory she wishes never to recall. Later that night, Alter, in his black cloak, sneaked onto the roof of the pawn shop under the bright moonlight. He opened the window carefully and entered, intending to check for himself the efficiency of the investigative sorcerers who had preceded him. He descended to the dark second floor, examining the place accurately and quietly. He used a magical tool to search for any trace, but he found no evidence of the Ronit holy artifact. Noticing the magical tool's lack of reaction, he concluded that the target must be on the first floor. He went down the stairs with confident steps, convinced that the fleeing sorcerer Ivor, or the holy artifact carrying holy power, had only stayed on the lower floor. Alter thought that checking the ledger would be the fastest way to reach his goal, assuring himself that Ivor wouldn't have come here without a clear reason. He approached the table stealthily, but stopped suddenly when he noticed something unexpected. He found Alicia in a deep sleep and was surprised for a moment, thinking she was unconscious before realizing she was just asleep. Alicia was using the huge ledger he was looking for as her pillow, which made him marvel at her action. Alter smiled with slight sarcasm and admiration, describing her way of sleeping on top of the ledger as an impressive security strategy. Alter noticed the presence of hanging paper notes, wishing him a good morning and telling him that he was on the second floor, directing him to go straight down to the kitchen on the first floor, ignoring everything else, with prior reassurance that he could trust the content of the message despite his doubts. Upon responding, he found another note congratulating him on his arrival and asking him to open the cabinet carrying that paper, where he would find a strange-colored drink he must consume, after which he could check the right drawer to find a Turkish sweet as a gift. While Elisha was deep in sleep over the desk, she muttered disjointed words, apologizing and begging someone not to take her. Alter was looking at her silently at that moment, while she continued to rave in her sleep, calling for her grandfather in a low voice squeezed with pain. The next morning, the sun rose over the pawn shop, and Elisha woke up stretching lazily after a night spent sleeping on her desk. She felt some discomfort due to a bad dream she had, wondering in confusion if it was because of the worst memory spell she had used yesterday, despite being sure she had drunk the holy water as a precaution. As she regained her consciousness, she was surprised to find a piece of candy lying on her desk, wondering how it got there, especially since she kept it in the attic. She sighed deeply, thinking that maybe she should start cleaning the shop more accurately from now on. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell announcing the entry of a new customer, so she greeted him, but noticed he was wearing a dark cloak hiding his features completely. Anxiety gripped her for moments, wondering in her heart if this visitor was human, or if the Grim Reaper had come to take her as punishment for breaking natural laws by returning in time. But her fears vanished when the masked visitor spoke in a hesitant voice, inquiring if this place was indeed a pawn shop. Elisha smiled with great relief, confirming that this was the right place, thanking God in her heart that the visitor was just a normal human. The customer asked cautiously if she could examine an item he would present to her, and she agreed immediately, asking him to place what he brought on the table for her to examine. The customer revealed the item, which turned out to be a gold necklace carrying a huge ornate jewel that radiated a charming and bright luster. Elisha was stunned by the beauty of the piece, wondering to herself about the enormous value such a jewel might be appraised at. The jewel's brilliance increased significantly, making Elisha suspect that what she saw before her was not just ordinary jewelry, but that it looked like a holy artifact. She regained her professional composure and asked the customer kindly if he possessed any certificate or guarantee proving the authenticity of this piece. The customer replied in the negative, so Elisha inquired about a purchase receipt or a record from an auction, but the customer seemed hesitant and replied that he wasn't sure about that. The customer grabbed his cloak nervously, explaining that this jewel was all he owned, and asking in despair if the piece itself was not enough to complete the transaction. This response raised Elisha's suspicions, and she began to think anxiously about the possibility that this precious piece was stolen. She then remembered her stern words to Alter the day before, when she confidently told him he had come to the wrong shop because they don't deal in stolen goods. She also remembered his sarcastic question about her ability to distinguish the difference, and his comment on her great self-confidence. Elisha looked at the customer before her, after realizing from her voice that it was a girl, convinced in her heart that she might not judge the piece from the first glance, but her intuition in reading people told her that what this girl brought was not stolen. Elisha justified her conclusion to herself as she poured tea for the customer, considering that a real thief would have tried to sell the piece and get rid of it immediately, while this girl was content to just ask for a look at it. Elisha offered the cup of tea to the girl, then asked her calmly about the nature of the relationship she had with this precious jewel. The masked girl held the cup between her trembling hands and began to tell her story, explaining that this necklace was an inheritance left to her by her mother and that she felt overwhelming happiness when she obtained it. Elisha noticed a fine detail, which was an elegant ring adorning the girl's finger, so she concluded from the quality of both the artifact and the ring together that this customer belonged to a noble family, or one with strong influence, and wondered if she was going through an urgent financial crisis. The girl continued her talk in fear, revealing that there was someone trying to take this necklace from her by force, which shocked Elisha, who hurried to ask about this person's identity. The girl answered in a trembling voice, saying that her uncle was the one trying to take it, justifying it by saying that someone like her didn't deserve to own something of this much value. The girl explained that this was the reason she came, as she heard that precious belongings could be deposited as security in pawn shops. But Elisha told her kindly that the shop's policy did not include storing things or keeping them as deposits. The masked girl admitted she knew the jewel in her possession could be sold, which surprised Elisha, who wondered why she would want to give up something of such importance and value. The girl held her hand, explaining that her only goal was that the jewel not fall into her uncle's hands, and asserting in despair that it would inevitably be taken from her because she had no power to prevent it. From under her cover, she asked Elisha to sell the jewel only when she found someone worthy of it, justifying it by saying that whoever has the ability to buy it must enjoy both money and power. Elisha gave her a serious and firm look, then told her flatly and directly that she refused to complete this deal. The girl was shocked and confused, asking in a broken voice what she should do now after this refusal. Elisha picked up her magnifying glass to examine the jewel, wondering how she could sell something so precious, and explaining that emeralds are delicate stones that get affected and scratched easily when exposed to the slightest shock. She pointed to the necklace in admiration, drawing the girl's attention to the fact that this particular piece did not contain a single flaw or a simple scratch. Then she smiled at her warmly, asserting that there was no person who would appreciate the value of this jewel and protect it more than her, begging her to continue protecting it herself as she had done until now. But the girl grabbed her cloak again in fear, repeating her worries that keeping it would certainly mean her uncle taking it. Elisha devised a clever solution. She told her she couldn't sell it, but she could lend her money using the jewel as collateral, making the girl realize that the shop would keep it safely, thus bypassing the shop's policy that prevents storing customers' belongings as deposits. The masked girl understood the idea and agreed to borrow the money against the pawn of the necklace, asking eagerly about the amount she could get. Elisha pointed her finger at a single gold coin she placed on the table, setting the value of the loan at just 1 gold piece. She explained the pawn conditions, stating that the duration was 3 months at 10% interest, but she decided to waive the interest completely, given the smallness of the amount granted. Elisha stressed the necessity of the girl returning to retrieve her necklace, so the girl promised with a relieved smile that she would definitely return to repay the loan. Elisha opened the ledger, pointing out the necessity of recording the transaction because it was a formal pawn operation, and asked the customer to tell her her name. The girl hesitated a little before revealing that her name was Rena, so Elisha repeated the name and noted it in the ledger. Elisha bid the customer farewell with a bright smile, hoping to see her next time, and Rena returned the greeting, confirming their next meeting. After she left, Elisha contemplated the necklace, thinking that it was not just an elaborate ornament, but a holy artifact whose value was no less than tens of millions of gold coins. Yet she had lent against it for a ridiculous sum of 1 coin. Elisha placed the jewel carefully inside a safe box, fully aware that this piece was priceless to Rena. Later, it rained heavily, and Elisha stood watching the empty street from behind the window, noticing that no one was passing in this cold weather. Suddenly, her attention was caught by the appearance of a person wearing a white cloak walking in the rain toward the shop. Elisha turned quickly, wondering to herself if this visitor was really heading to the pawn shop. As soon as the doorbell rang, she greeted the newcomer with a broad smile and a warm welcome. The fair-haired young visitor looked up at her and asked her if she was Michael's granddaughter. The young man smiled, expressing his admiration for the great resemblance between her and her grandfather, which astonished Elisha and made her wonder in surprise if she really looked like him. The young man confirmed he had noticed it from the first glance, adding that he had heard a lot about her from Michel himself, but she asked him why he hesitated and was momentarily confused. A loud sneeze interrupted her talk, as he explained while shivering that he was caught in the rain and felt very cold, asking permission to come in to warm up. While wiping raindrops off his hair, he asked Elisha about her grandfather's whereabouts. Elisha told him that her grandfather had transferred ownership of the shop to her, and that he was currently on a trip, asking him to tell her his need if he had come for business. A confident and cunning smile appeared on the young man's face, and he concluded from her words that her staying to manage the shop meant she was still capable of appraising and evaluating things. The young man suddenly approached Alicia, noting that her grandfather, Michel, had mentioned her to him before, so she moved away from him, telling him that if he revealed his name, she would review the records to confirm. But the young man smiled craftily and told her there was no need for that because his name was not recorded in the book, then quickly changed the subject by taking out an ornate box and asking her to take a look at it. Alicia asked him professionally if he possessed a certificate of documentation or a purchase receipt, or even a record from an auction proving his ownership of the piece, but he replied in the negative. She continued her interrogation and asked him if he had made it himself or commissioned someone to make it, and he replied with a calm smile, denying that as well. Alicia's suspicions grew, and she pointed out the absence of any clear story about how he obtained this box. So the young man agreed, asking coldly why she was surprised. Alicia answered him firmly and angrily that the reason was because the piece before them was a holy artifact, which made the young man flinch, with clear signs of shock appearing on him. Alicia stared at him with a sharp gaze, having become certain in her heart that this scoundrel standing before her was nothing but a thief. What increased her internal anger was that he was not just an ordinary thief, but a thief who dared to steal a holy artifact. While the young man stood before her, smiling nervously and scratching his head in confusion, the young man stammered, trying to grasp the situation, and asked her in bewilderment how she knew the piece was a holy artifact. But Alicia struck her hands on the table hard, asserting that this was not what mattered now. She shouted in his face fiercely, demanding he confess where he had stolen this piece from. The young man stepped back, raising his hands in an attempt to defend himself, strongly denying the theft charge and repeating his question about how she realized the nature of the piece. Alicia told him that anyone could know that just by looking at it. Alicia sternly ordered him not to move from his place and took out a magical communication device to start taking necessary measures. The young man realized she intended to report him to the temple, so panic seized him. He picked up his box quickly and began running away, making Alicia surprised by his quick reaction. As soon as the young man ran toward the door trying to exit, Alicia activated the protection system and huge iron bars fell, closing the entrances forcefully. The young man found himself outside the iron bars, so he turned toward Alicia with a nervous smile, trying to convince her again that he was not a thief. Alicia mocked his claim, asking if he had ever met a thief who openly confessed to being one, despite his sarcastic admission that some of them exist. Then she headed with quick steps toward one of the drawers and took out a small spray bottle, determined that a thief remains a thief regardless of his justifications. Alicia sprayed the contents of the bottle toward him through the iron bars, but the contents moved in her direction. Alicia groaned, covering her face in pain, while the young man tried to tell her he really wasn't a thief and that he understood why she misunderstood the matter. Alicia was looking at him from behind the bars with rapid breaths and angry gazes, cursing him in her heart and calling him a little thief. Suddenly, the young man's eyes widened in shock as if he realized something terrifying, and he stammered, saying this was not a suitable time to talk, promising to explain everything next time. In the blink of an eye, he began running away from her, leaving Alicia holding the bars and shouting at him, angrily, demanding he return. Alicia collapsed in front of the bars, shouting and crying dramatically from the intensity of her frustration, expressing how insane she felt about what was happening to her. She knelt on the floor feeling exhausted, deciding she needed to get some rest after things had come to this point, and she did not stop cursing that scoundrel until the end. Before the young man left, he waved to her with a broad smile, announcing his name was Crescens, and that he would return later. Alicia jumped up and shouted in resentment, rejecting the idea of his return and warning him against daring to return to her shop again. Then she turned quickly to search the cabinets, remembering she had left some holy water nearby. She finally found the bottle of holy water. She sprayed the holy water to heal herself and smiled with relief, directing her thanks to the world tree and appreciating the value of this expensive liquid that saved her in this situation. Alicia stood before the barred door, looking out with gazes full of determination and anger, vowing that the thief would pay dearly if she managed to catch him again. After Alicia realized that her defensive spray was no longer fit for use, she decided that she must obtain a new anti-theft magical tool. Elsewhere, the young man, Crescens, was walking with confident steps through a majestic corridor lined with crowds of priests, heading toward a large hall in the temple. As he advanced, he wondered to himself how remarkably Alicia was able to identify the piece he presented to her as a holy artifact so quickly. Her ability was so extraordinary that even Michel, her grandfather, could not have appraised such pieces with the naked eye alone. The young man recalled a previous conversation between him and Michel, where he had asked about his granddaughter, her personality, and whether She was trustworthy enough to take over the management of the pawn shop after him. Mashal replied then that her taking over the shop would lead her to one of two destinies with no third option. She would either fail miserably or succeed brilliantly. The young man smiled to himself in the present, admitting that she certainly knew how to stir up situations, and that Michelle was half right in his words. He wondered in his heart whether her ultimate fate would be failure or success. His thoughts were interrupted by one of his assistants, who called him by his official title, Your Eminence, Cardinal Crescenziano, reminding him that it was time for his meeting, so he told him he would join him shortly. After putting on his official robes, he looked at the box containing the holy artifact and vowed to visit her again. His curiosity was great to see for himself whether she would fail or succeed in her endeavor. The next day, Elisha headed to a luxurious financial institution carrying her bag. However, the receptionist stopped her apologetically, explaining that the area she intended to visit was for VIPs only. Elisha replied calmly that she was aware of that. The employee asked with a confused smile why she was there then. Elisha realized the employee was hinting that her appearance did not suggest enough wealth or nobility to be in this place. She presented her with an official document, explaining that she had come to handle some matters on behalf of Count Hugo Leonite, so the employee immediately apologized and allowed her to pass. An official behind a desk received her and asked what service he could provide for her. Elisha calmly requested to see the bank balance of Mr. Hugo Leonite. The official inquired cautiously about the nature of her relationship with the Count. She replied that she was his relative. However, the official explained that he could not grant her access to his account simply based on kinship. So Elisha opened her bag, assuring him that she had come prepared. She used the same method those fraudsters had used to access her grandfather's property, presenting a power of attorney officially signed by Hugo, along with a magical recording of his verbal statement granting her this authorization. Her voice rang out from the magical device, asking the Count if he was the one offering to delegate this authority to her, followed by Hugo's screaming voice in agreement. After reviewing the papers and the recording, the official confirmed that everything was in order and asked her to wait for a few moments. Elisha thought about how she only managed to obtain these documents by threatening that coward Hugo, but she knew that her grandfather would never have willingly granted those people access to his wealth, and that they must have forged the documents or impersonated him. The official told her that if she wanted to withdraw any amount, she would need the Count's official seal. She replied that she didn't care about that, and that she only came to check the balance. When she reviewed the account statement, she noticed the remaining amount was less than she expected, but she found a massive record of large financial transactions, and the depositors were all different. Elisha smiled craftily, concluding that Hugo must have been laundering money for Viscountess Rosen. She also noticed that all the bank branches involved in these transactions were located in one area, meaning there was a nearby place where large sums of money were being traded. Elisha smiled with satisfaction and told the official she had seen enough, thanking him for his help. As she left, she confidently identified her next destination, Philosophy Auction House. It happened that today was the date of their night auction, so she decided to head there and set a small trap. Upon her arrival at the auction house, Elisha found the place teeming with nobles and the wealthy, and she noted to herself that she had heard about guards at the entrance. She approached a large man in a black uniform and asked him if this was the entrance, feeling confused as she tugged at the edge of his garment, but she was shocked when the man turned around, only to discover it was Alter, the mysterious customer who had visited her shop, and he recognized her instantly as well. Alter began by asking her why she was here. His sudden question flustered her, so she asked if she had come to a place she wasn't supposed to be, then innocently wondered if this place was his home. Alter denied her words, mocking the idea of someone living in an auction house, but she smartly replied that some people live in pawn shops. Her reply piqued his curiosity, and he asked if she really lived in that shop, which she confirmed. He then inquired if others knew about this, such as her family, and she replied that she didn't think so. She explained in her heart that the matter was more precise than that. They didn't know because she didn't allow them to, fearing her grandfather's anger. She seriously wondered if living in a pawn shop was truly a pitiful thing. Elisha tried to end the conversation with a smile, explaining to him that she recognized his curiosity about her, but she had important work to accomplish. As she was about to leave, she announced she would go first. She was thinking that the auction was about to start and she had to hurry inside, but he stopped her, having put on a mask that covered part of his face, explaining that he also had some business here, and suggested they talk more after she finished her work. Alter stepped ahead of her with confident strides, while Elisha looked at him in bewilderment. Elisha thought about his strange offer, wondering sarcastically if she had already gained immunity against flattering remarks. But he interrupted her thoughts, asking her not to jump to conclusions that he was curious about her or interested in her. Elisha felt relieved. admitting to herself that she hadn't gained that immunity yet. Then he pointed out that her eyes were bloodshot, which surprised her. He advised her that she should suspect she had a disease in her eyes. This made her wonder if he was worried about her, realizing that this is why people believe he is interested in her. When an employee welcomed them, inquiring why he had come to the philosophy auction house, Elisha interrupted them, announcing she was a seller, so the employee asked her to follow him. She walked behind him toward her destination. She entered a luxurious waiting room designated for sellers, where a few people were sitting. Her tranquility was interrupted by a man in a purple mask who called her in a condescending manner, startling her. He asked her with disdain if she knew where she was. She replied calmly, asking if this wasn't the seller's waiting room for the philosophy auction house. He told her that wasn't what he meant. Then the man commented contemptuously that this was the problem with the place. They allow anyone in just for claiming to be a seller. But Elisha stared at him coldly, thinking to herself that the auction house is not for appraising people, but for appraising possessions. The masked man continued his mockery, wondering about the point of examining items closely if the people presenting them aren't examined, which made Elisha repeat his sentence in surprise. He explained that one cannot know if a piece was picked up from the road or stolen without verifying the seller's identity. His words triggered silent laughter in Elisha, as she found great irony in someone treating her like a thief, when just yesterday she had been hit by pepper spray while trying to catch a real thief. Instead of remaining silent, she asked him in a sarcastic tone why he didn't attend in broad daylight, which puzzled him. She explained that the daytime auction is a private auction attended only by invited guests, and that if he wanted to deal with verified individuals, he should have attended at that time. Then she added with biting sarcasm a question about whether he had already been excluded from the guest list. The man was enraged, clenching his fist, and asked her threateningly if she knew his identity. Then his anger escalated and he pushed her violently, vowing that he was capable of crushing anyone without influence like her in a moment. The tense scene was interrupted by the arrival of an employee who opened the door and called for the next person to enter, forcing the man to leave her. Inside, he was asked to present the item he brought with all relevant documents and receipts, along with a business card or identification document. The man grumbled, wondering why all these procedures were necessary despite it not being his first visit. The man exploded, shouting his name, Carlos Gulto, and reminding the employee that he had asked him to remember his name, something that shocked Elisha as she listened from outside. Elisha instantly recalled an old decree granting the Gult family the title of Baron in recognition of 3 years of loyal service to the head of the Ronit family, realizing this man was connected to her family. Elisha linked his 3 years of service to the time he began attracting Rosen's attention and wondered anxiously what he might have brought today. From behind the door, she heard the employee announce the end of the examination of a rare book. Then the employee called for the next person, and Elisha stepped inside. She was thinking that the information she gathered indicated that the rare books auction follows the paintings auction directly. With a look full of determination, she vowed in her heart that Carlos Gulto's plans would not go as he desired. Elisha entered the main auction hall and began searching with her eyes until she spotted Carlos sitting among the audience. She took a seat not far from him and directed a sharp look at him, wondering to herself what he would do if she continued to stare at him. Carlos noticed her stares, flinched, and his features changed, which confused her regarding his sudden reaction. Her thoughts were interrupted by Alter suddenly sitting in the seat next to her, which startled her. Alter calmly ordered her to look forward. Elisha whispered, wondering why he was sitting next to her despite there being many empty seats. The auction manager, Frederick, climbed onto the podium, announcing the start of the night auction. The first item displayed was a raw ruby said to have been extracted 100 years ago. After several pieces, the auction manager announced the next painting, a special piece titled Cologne Forest. He revealed the painting depicting a forest in the northwest, the work of an unknown artist who died 25 years ago, noting a crack at the bottom left of the painting. Whispers arose among the audience, wondering why pine forest paintings were common, and who would buy a flawed painting, but they were shocked when it was announced that the starting bid price was 100 million gold pieces, while a confident smile formed on Alicia's face. Alter turned to her and asked if this was the piece she had submitted. She confirmed it calmly. Alter commented that the painting looked like a failure at first glance, and wondered why she set such a ridiculous amount as the starting price. Elisha whispered back that the failure of the auction on that painting was exactly what she wanted. Alter immediately realized that her goal was not to get 100 million gold pieces, but something much bigger than that. He smiled slightly, commenting that her method reminded him of someone, which made Elisha internally surprised by his sharp insight. For a moment, she wondered about the identity of the person she might remind him of, but he alerted her again to look forward, and she quickly paid attention. The auction manager announced the start of the next auction dedicated to rare books and ancient manuscripts. Alicia felt excited. This was what she had been waiting for. The first book on display was an unpublished work by the late sociologist August, and Alicia realized this was the piece submitted by Carlos Gulto. The book was described as Interpretation of Authority, containing the author's original handwritten notes, which piqued the interest of the attendees. The auction began at a price of 200,000 gold pieces. While a lady wearing a hat was about to bid, another person interrupted her with a higher price, causing her to apologize in confusion. Alicia spotted Carlos Gulto looking at that lady with a cunning smile. She noticed that he didn't take his eyes off her for a single moment. Alicia felt the book's title was familiar to her, and that she had heard of it somewhere before. Suddenly, she remembered. This book was about to be classified as forbidden literature. She recalled reading an article on this subject and how she wondered about banning a work that hadn't been published yet. Even worse, the owner of the book was a government official who ended up being fired from her position because of it. She realized that the official was none other than the lady sitting in front of her, Hannah Diego. As the fierce bidding continued and the price reached 800,000 gold pieces, Alicia realized the whole truth. Rosanne had plotted Hannah's dismissal, expecting that Hannah would want to obtain that book at any cost. But with another man chasing her in the bidding, winning would not be easy. And here Alicia noticed something suspicious. Her doubts were confirmed when she saw Carlos tapping his foot on the floor. She concluded that the man sitting in front of them was receiving signals from Carlos to raise the price. She realized that Carlos must have planted a transmitter in his partner's shoe sole. One tap meant raising the price immediately, while 2 taps meant pretending to hesitate to gain time. The price had already reached 1,900,000 gold pieces. Alicia was very angry. They intended to fire Hannah anyway, yet they were trying to drain every last gold piece from her. She resolved not to let Hannah win this book and began thinking of a way to make that gang fall into their own trap and buy the book themselves, while exposing their true motives at the same time. When an idea sparkled in her mind, she turned to Alter and then whispered, asking him about the cost of hiring him for 1 hour, which astonished him. She reminded him that he was the one who asked her to buy him last time, and now she was asking for his price for just 1 hour. Before he could answer, she interrupted him firmly, saying there was no time for bargaining and that he should send the invoice to her shop later. Alicia whispered to Alter, explaining her plan. She pointed to the man with number 81 and revealed that Carlos Gulto sitting next to her was using a transmitter to send signals to him, aiming to deceive the lady with number 80 and make her buy the book at an exorbitant price. She continued that she would take care of the transmitter somehow, while he had to ensure the man number 81 didn't flee, but he wondered why all the trouble. Alter explained that even if lady number 80 bought the book at a high price, it wouldn't constitute any loss for Alicia. Alicia replied that the lady was innocent and about to fall victim to a group of fraudsters, and that she felt a duty to help her, even if there was no personal benefit for her. Alter gave her a scrutinizing look, so she thought to herself that he wouldn't help her in the end. But he surprised her by agreeing to cooperate with her, which astonished her. Meanwhile, the auction price reached 6 million gold pieces, which shocked Alicia due to the size of the amount. She whispered to him quickly that it was time to move. Then he stood up and left his seat in a hurry. Alicia searched her bag, remembering she had left her defensive magical tools behind, but she took out the bottle of holy water she still had. The auction manager was about to close the bidding and began the countdown while Lady Hannah Diego, number 80, raised her paddle in anticipation. Alicia noticed Carlos's cunning smile and realized he was about to tap his foot twice to give his partner the signal to stop bidding. As he raised his foot, Alicia threw the bottle of holy water at the right moment so it rolled directly toward his shoe. The holy water splashed under his shoe, seemingly disabling the transmitter. He stood shocked, shouting in refusal of what happened. Despite his shouting trying to stop the auction, it was too late. His partner, who didn't receive the stop signal, raised his paddle at the last moment. With the final strike of the gavel, the book was announced sold to bidder number 81 for 8,500,000 gold pieces, which struck Carlos with absolute terror. Carlos let out a cry of despair while holding his head. Security guards approached Carlos, asking him to stay in his seat for a moment because they needed to verify something. In the meantime, after the auction manager received a report, Carlos's partner tried to flee, but Alter stopped him with a quick move. Alter threw him to the ground and searched his ear, confirming that something suspicious was indeed there. An official thanked Alter, not only for reporting the incident, but for his direct help in catching the fraudsters. while Alter held the small transmitter. Lady Hana approached him and expressed her deep gratitude, explaining that she came to the auction for the first time for a book she desired and nearly fell victim to a scam. But Alter told her that the person who deserved thanks was not him, but another person who was sitting there. Hana looked toward the place he pointed to, only to find the seat empty. A slight smile formed on Alter's face. Later, Hana gave her card to Alter, begging him to contact her if he discovered the identity of the person who helped her, because she wanted to thank them personally. After she left, Alter wondered to himself where Alicia had disappeared to so quickly. He was thinking that he had come to the auction on purpose because he thought that woman might come to sell the Ruffanot, but she seemed as if she had come just to attend the auction. He recalled her words about Hana being an innocent person about to be scammed, and her duty to help her even without return, and that by doing so she also helped someone who almost got scammed as well. He concluded in the end that she didn't seem at all like Ivor's partner. Alter shook his head in denial, thinking to himself that he was still unable to confirm this conclusion yet. He recalled the image of Ivor, and how he had worked hard and smartly for several months until he managed to gain people's trust and satisfaction. In the midst of his thoughts, he noticed the glow of the clasp fixed on his wrist with a red light, making him realize that the tool was still reacting and pointing to something. He thought that even if Alicia was not the one who hid the holy Ruffanot sword herself, she was certainly linked to it and to the way it disappeared in one way or another. Later that night, Alter returned to his headquarters where one of his assistants welcomed him, announcing his arrival. Alter nodded his head and informed the assistant that they had not found anything suspicious or unusual during their search of the auction house. Alter noticed a change in the assistant's features. He asked in surprise why he was acting this way and if any new information had been received. The assistant denied it, confirming that no news had arrived from Moro province. Alter sat behind his desk while the assistant hesitantly reminded him that he had left a magical tool in the form of a business card in the pawn shop. The assistant pointed to a blue magical crystal placed on the desk, explaining that it hadn't captured any sounds before, but he was surprised today when checking it to hear sounds of crying and sobbing coming from it, and desperate questions about what to do. The assistant explained that this happened shortly before the start of the auction, where they clearly heard the shop owner crying before the broadcast was suddenly cut off. This report worried Alter, especially when the assistant asked him if he had seen her today, expressing fear that harm might have befallen her. Alter recalled the scene of Alicia in the auction house, remembering how her eyes were bloodshot with redness. He wondered to himself if that redness resulted from her crying as they heard in the recording. Alter stood up from his seat seriously, answering that he didn't know, and blaming himself because, despite all the questions he had asked her, he had never asked her how she was doing. Back to the events of the auction house, security guards were leading Carlos Gulto out of the place, while one of the house officials confronted him with a document bearing his signature, firmly warning him against approaching the auction house again. The door slammed shut behind Carlos after he was expelled. He walked with heavy steps and features clouded with despair, anxiously wondering what he would say to justify this complete failure. He approached a luxurious carriage parked outside in fear. Inside was Viscountess Rosanne, petting a small dog, and before he could speak, the guards opened the carriage door violently. The guards pushed him roughly inside the carriage, and he fell to his knees before the Viscountess in a humiliating position. Rosanne looked down at him with extreme disdain and told him coldly that Rosen stepped with the heel of her high heels. Rosen stepped with the heel of her high shoe on Carlos's back mercilessly, expressing her extreme displeasure and emphasizing that her disappointment in Hugo was enough for her today. Carlos cried, begging her to forgive him, claiming what happened was just an unexpected accident. Carlos continued his crying and justifications, arguing that he couldn't have expected the sudden failure of the magical tool, and strongly assuring her that he never mentioned her name at all. Rosen listened to him with disgust, while Carlos blamed his foolish partner who ruined things and complained about a strange girl who kept provoking him and irritating his nerves the whole time. He added angrily that things got worse when a strange painting was displayed with a fantastic starting price of 100 million gold pieces and wasn't sold, which increased the tension at the auction and made the situation difficult to read. Suddenly, her eyes widened as if she realized something important and ordered him to stop. Rosen sharply asked for details of that painting that failed to sell. Carlos replied, stuttering, that it was a painting titled Cologne Forest. Upon hearing the name, Rosanne was shocked and signs of terror appeared on Hugo's face, who was present with them. Rosen ordered Carlos to leave immediately, and he obeyed her orders, scurrying away. Carlos left the carriage with staggering and fast steps, and the carriage door closed behind him. Rosen muttered in annoyance, noting that she intended to use Carlos for some tasks, but he proved hopeless. She grumbled about her failure to get rid of Hana Diego, whom she considers an obstacle, deciding to postpone the matter of getting rid of that fool for later. Rosen directed her cunning gazes toward Hugo, who flinched from her look, and asked him maliciously for his opinion on the painting he handed to his uncle, whose valuation reached 100 million gold pieces. Sweat poured from Hugo as he tried to justify the situation, stuttering, noting that the painting wasn't sold in the end, and emphasizing it was the type that isn't popular, so there wouldn't be any problem. Rosen replied to him sharply and contemptuously, wondering if he really believed Michelle's goal was to sell the painting to make money. She explained to him that if the painting was unsellable to begin with, what would drive him to display it at the auction in the first place? Rosen concluded confidently that displaying the painting in that way was nothing but a deliberate signal, which left Hugo in a state of bewilderment, wondering what the signal was. Rosen concluded confidently that the painting was as a signal sent to someone, explaining that when the assistant who receives that signal buys the painting, it is completed as a kind of secret code. Based on setting the price at 100 million gold pieces, Rosen asserted that what that painting hides must be worth this huge amount, making Hugo gasp in shock, thinking about the possibility that the painting was evidence of his uncle's hidden wealth's location. Rosen smiled maliciously, recalling the details of the painting depicting a coniferous forest in the northwest, suggesting the Duke might have buried his wealth in that place. Hugo was struck with extreme panic, eagerly asserting that he didn't have the slightest idea about the importance of that painting, and stammered, wondering in helplessness what they should do now, especially since they couldn't retrieve it. Hugo's panic increased as he held his head in despair, noting that security measures at the Philosophy Auction House are the strongest in the Empire, which prompted Rosen to call him by his name in a tone filled with annoyance at his cowardly actions. Rosen gave him a sharp and stern look and asked him disapprovingly if he had forgotten how she makes her money. Hugo was shocked and asked her hesitantly if she intended to do that. Rosen confirmed with a confident smile that she had already prepared an exact copy of the painting. Hugo grumbled that his uncle had become a big nuisance with his actions, denouncing his pushing that girl as a front for him, adding that she really seemed like she knew nothing of what was going on. Rosen interrupted him sharply, considering that the girl, knowing or not, made no difference to their plans. Rosen sat down, announcing that if the uncle didn't intend to appear himself, they would have to drag him out by force. Hugo wondered in confusion how they would achieve that. An evil smile appeared on Rosen's face, suggesting destroying the pawn shop and erasing it completely. She added that this step would end all the annoying problems, and that he would not be able to continue hiding for much longer. Elsewhere, Alicia opened the door of a clinic with a bright smile, greeting the doctor, who returned her welcome warmly, calling her by her name. The doctor gave Alicia a basket full of medicinal herbs she had requested previously, and she thanked the doctor gratefully for his usual help. Alicia began talking about her grandfather's health condition, explaining that when she consulted other doctors, they all agreed on their ignorance of the nature of his illness, which made her feel completely lost. Alicia recalled her multiple visits to various clinics, and how she desperately wondered each time if this was the last place she would head to. She was always afraid she would be asked to bring her grandfather personally, or that she would hear the same answer from them of not knowing, which would have forced her to search for doctors in other areas. The doctor welcomed her and asked the reason for her visit, but he stopped for a moment as if contemplating her. Alicia asked him in wonder if she had come to the wrong place, emphasizing she came looking for a doctor named Stefan Terenzio. The doctor smiled and confirmed he was the person in question, apologizing for his momentary distraction as he forgot something he was thinking about. The doctor repeated his question about the purpose of her coming, and Alicia hesitated a bit while trying to gather her thoughts. She told him sadly that her grandfather was very sick, and that he hadn't been this way before, but he had become very weak recently. She added that sometimes he loses his ability to remember her suddenly and without any prior warning signs. So the doctor asked her with interest about how long these symptoms had lasted. She replied that the condition started about half a year ago, confirming he hadn't suffered any head injury as far as she knew, making the doctor sink into thought. The doctor asked her why she didn't bring the patient with her, and she explained with regret that there were certain circumstances preventing her from that. Sadness clouded Alicia's features as she assumed diagnosing his condition would be extremely difficult based only on her explanation. But the doctor smiled kindly to reassure her, confirming he thought he roughly knew what this illness was. Elisha was surprised, and her eyes sparkled with hope, while the doctor explained he had previously read medical records of a patient suffering from exactly similar symptoms. The doctor pulled one of the medical books from his desk, noting that sudden memory loss accompanied by physical weakness might be symptoms of a rare disease known as Mendax. Elisha asked in shock what Mendax disease was. The doctor explained it was a rare disease occurring due to exposure to certain toxins for long periods, adding that the long incubation period of the disease makes it difficult to determine the exact cause of infection. Elisha leaned toward him eagerly, asking if there was a cure for this disease. The doctor replied with a weak smile that there was a way, though describing it as a cure might be a bit of an exaggeration. The doctor explained that drinking a decoction of eye mint roots would help alleviate symptoms, but he qualified that due to the rarity of this disease and because he hadn't examined the patient himself. He feared there was a risk of side effects occurring if this herb was prescribed. Elisha went silent for a moment, looking down, then raised her head with a firm look and begged him to prescribe it to her anyway. Elisha asked anxiously if they could stop taking the herb if things got worse. The doctor agreed, confirming it was possible if she was really sure of her decision. Elisha told herself, trying to reassure herself that it would be okay, justifying it by saying that if she didn't try this way, she would have no other way to treat her grandfather. Elisha smiled with relief and thanked the doctor warmly, expressing her feeling that she was finally able to breathe, and emphasizing that her grandfather's condition was gradually improving, meaning the herb was having its positive effect. The doctor expressed his relief at hearing this good news, while Elisha suddenly remembered another matter she wanted to talk about. She asked him quietly if there was anyone who came to ask about her or her grandfather. The doctor reassured her, denying it and confirming that even if someone asked, he always remembers to make the excuse that their absence is due to Miss Elisha's poor health. Elisha winked at him playfully and asked him to mention a disease name that sounds a bit serious if possible. The doctor laughed kindly and promised her to fulfill her request. Elisha bid him farewell with a smile and left the clinic, while the doctor remained watching her quietly as she walked away. Elisha walked the city streets thinking that she had sent the herb roots to the nursing home as well, and wondered to herself if she should buy some new self-defense tools to ensure her safety. This thought prompted her to enter a magical shop where the doorbell rang. She began by greeting the sorceress, Emma. Emma welcomed her with a broad smile and asked her if she had come to buy magical tools again. Elisha confirmed that enthusiastically. Elisha began looking around the shop, explaining that she didn't want something simple like a spray this time, but was looking for a powerful tool that could subdue an opponent immediately. Emma stopped for a moment, her mind wandering after Elisha told her she wanted tools like handcuffs or a whip. Emma's cheeks flushed as she smiled maliciously and jokingly asked Elisha if these were her personal preferences. Elisha flinched sharply and waved her hands in obvious confusion, denying the matter completely, and emphasizing in a loud voice that she meant tools for self-defense and actual protection only. Emma continued to look at her with doubting gazes, accusing her of inventing excuses, while Elisha continued her denial with drops of sweat pouring from her in embarrassment. Elisha changed the subject suddenly when she remembered something, telling Emma there was something she wanted to ask her about. Emma pointed to herself, wondering in surprise. Elisha whispered, asking if sorcerers had a guild like traders, or an emergency communication network, or even a gathering for Magic Tower graduates, but Emma denied it flatly, emphasizing that sorcerers don't have a single atom of unity and cohesion. Elisha sighed in disappointment, noting there was a sorcerer she wanted to find, which piqued Sorceress Emma's confusion and curiosity. Emma returned to her mockery and asked her playfully if she wanted to find the man she fell in love with at first sight. Elisha exploded in anger and shouted, denying this idea again. Elisha confessed she actually didn't know the sorcerer's name nor his face shape, and all she knew was the formula of his magical spell only. Emma's face brightened and she clapped her hands enthusiastically, explaining that a spell formula is considered as a sorcerer's private signature, and that by possessing this formula, she wouldn't need to know his name or face. Then she eagerly asked her to describe the shape of the spell. Elisha took out a paper and handed it to Emma, who praised the accuracy of the drawing, then began reading the components that make up the spell, which included a beetle, an olive tree, smoke, coral, and a pomegranate. Emma smiled, noting that this mixture is strange and unusual, but she reassured Elisha of her ability to find the owner of the spell, making Elisha feel great relief. Emma caught her with a logical question about how she was able to see the spell formula, even though she wasn't a sorceress. Elisha laughed nervously, trying to evade, claiming there was a reason for that. Elisha told herself that she couldn't reveal she saw this spell in a painting during her previous life, and satisfied herself with nodding her head in silence and closing her eyes, leaving Emma in bewilderment. Elisha smiled with confidence and determination, thinking in her heart that finding this sorcerer would be the key that would help her restore the Raunit family's rights. Elisha left thinking that Rosen must have heard about the Cologne Forest painting by this time. She concluded in her heart that Rosen not coming to her directly likely meant she already possessed an imitation of that painting. Nevertheless, Elisha stood with confidence, completely certain that Rosen would eventually have no choice but to buy the original painting. As Elisha was organizing some items in the shop, a more important question occurred to her mind about the real reason that drove Rosen to try to fire Hana Diego from her job. Her features looked serious as she thought about how dangerous it was for Rosen to possess strong influence and relationships, enabling her to intervene in book classification and consider them forbidden. Her train of thought was interrupted by a voice calling from outside, asking permission to enter and inquiring if there was anyone inside. Elisha responded immediately in surprise. Elisha rose quickly from behind the table, which led to her colliding hard and falling on the floor, groaning in pain. She rubbed her head in pain while the customer asked her anxiously if she was okay. Elisha regained her balance and asked the customer professionally about the service she could provide for her. The customer appeared clearly, and it was none other than Hana Diego, who was present at the auction, who asked Elisha with a bright smile if she remembered her. Elisha looked at her in confusion while still rubbing her head. The lady began reminding her that she was the one who helped her in the auction house that day. The lady introduced herself enthusiastically as Hana Diego, begging Elisha to call her by her first name, which made Elisha wonder in amazement in her heart if this was really Hana. Elisha's features quickly shifted to a broad and playful smile, thinking that luck had finally knocked on her door, and welcomed her warmly, expressing her look forward to working with her. Elisha offered a cup of tea to her guest. Hana thanked her with a kind smile while sipping from it. Elisha watched Hana quietly, surprised by her peaceful appearance that doesn't suggest any harm, and wondered in herself about the motive that might make Mrs. Rosen want to get rid of such an innocent character. Curiosity led her to ask Hana how she knew the way to the shop to come to it. Hana tilted her head in wonder and explained that a tall man with fearsome features was the one who told her about this place, and the image of Alter materialized in Elisha's mind immediately. Elisha realized it was indeed him who did that, but she was surprised by his motives behind this action. Hana continued narrating what happened, stating that she went to thank that man because he was near the site of the event, but he told her that the real person who helped her was another person. Hana added enthusiastically that he sent her a telegram the previous day containing details of this pawn shop, and as soon as she read the message, she took leave from her work and hurried directly to the shop. Elisha laughed modestly, asserting she didn't do what was worth all this trouble, then inquired about the nature of her work that made her take leave specifically for it. Hana replied proudly that she was an Imperial Documents employee working in the archives department. Hana justified her impulsive action, saying she joined this work for her intense passion for reading, and therefore completely lost her senses when she saw that rare book at the auction. Elisha smartly concluded that the nature of Hana's work requires her to deal with ancient texts as well. Hana confirmed that with a broad smile, explaining that this was the main reason behind her intense excitement to visit this particular shop. Hana began contemplating the exhibits with eyes shining with fascination, expressing her admiration for the pumice stone used to smooth parchment, describing the spots on it as beautiful, and pointing to a glass paperweight that looks perfect for reading, while Elisha watched her in silence. Elisha realized in her heart that Hana was a true lover of books. Elisha seized the opportunity and offered her to go down to the cellar to see more old books and documents they possess, so Hana agreed enthusiastically. They went down together to the cellar full of huge bookshelves. Hana let out a cry of admiration and fascination with the place. Happiness overwhelmed Hana until she joked with Elisha, saying she feels she will fall in love with her, to which Elisha replied with a light laugh. Suddenly, Hana stopped before one of the shelves, making a sound of wonder, then pointed eagerly toward a book with a distinctive cover and asked Elisha enthusiastically if she was ready to sell this book to her. Elisha replied with a smile, admitting that the price of the book was a bit high. Hana expressed her great happiness and deep thanks to Elisha, emphasizing that thanks to her help, she was able to save 8.5 million gold pieces. Elisha handed her the requested book and decided playfully to offer her the glass paperweight she liked as an additional gift, making Hana let out a cry of joy and surprise. Hana asked Elisha kindly if she needed any other help in the place. Hana added enthusiastically and proudly that she was in fact a seasoned expert in discovering forged documents and books, in addition to her skill in restoring damaged texts. This information stopped Alicia, asking with interest if she really was an expert in spotting forgery, so Hana confirmed that with all confidence. Elisha seized the opportunity and asked her quietly if she had come across among the forged documents she discovered recently any document concerning Viscountess Rosen, which surprised Hana. Hana asked in shock how Alicia knew this matter, while the latter confirmed in her heart the correctness of her suspicions. Hana explained that the Viscountess tried repeatedly to embezzle money from the budget using forged receipts and suggested that her funding had been cut in half because of Hana's continuous exposure of those manipulations. Elisha was stunned and surprised in her heart that Rosen tried to plot Hana's firing for a trivial and vengeful reason like this. Elisha presented the book in a paper bag to Hana, who received it with a broad smile, expressing her profound thanks. Elisha asked Hana very seriously to inform her immediately if she received any suspicious message from Mrs. Rosen in the future. Hana nodded her head enthusiastically, confirming her total agreement to her request, as she also had a feeling that the Viscountess might proceed to do something. Hana smiled brightly, confirming to Elisha that she realizes she is a person who can be trusted and relied upon. Hana bid Elisha farewell, waving her hand, and promised her to visit the shop again in the near future, before closing the door behind her, leaving the place. Elisha stood alone contemplating the situation, thinking that her possessing memories from her previous life is an undoubtedly useful matter, but she realized her urgent need for real-time and updated information to be able to prepare correctly to face Viscountess Rosen. Elisha looked at a box containing business cards and concluded that she no longer had a choice but to head to visit the Information Guild. Later that night, Elisha stood before a huge building in one of the lighted streets, asserting to herself that this was the Information Guild headquarters she was looking for. She recalled her memories when she visited the Information Guild in the Moro Duchy in her previous life, and remembered the shock that possessed her when she opened the door at that time to find a dark and gloomy place. She held the door handle while wondering anxiously if this place would carry the same terrifying and frightening atmosphere. As soon as she opened the door, she was greatly surprised by the bright lighting, cleanliness, and cheerful colors filling the place, contrary to what she had expected completely. A cheerful man with red hair welcomed her warmly, apologizing for the simple mess and explaining as he stood on a wooden ladder that he was busy hanging new curtains celebrating the coming of spring, and asked her if this was her first visit. A small and cute cat caught Elisha's attention, rubbing against her legs in affection and quietness. The man got down from his ladder and introduced himself as William, the head of the Information Guild, then asked her with a broad smile about the drink she preferred to consume, suggesting juice, tea, or milk. Elisha asked for juice, and William laughed playfully and invited her to sit until he prepared it. William presented her with a cup of orange juice and noticed her wandering and surprised looks at the place and asked her about the reason for this. Silent staring. Elisha confessed with a confused smile that she was expecting an Information Guild headquarters to be a place suggesting more awe and mystery. William laughed loudly, expressing his understanding of her position, and explained to her that the place was indeed scary until a few years ago. William sighed in sorrow, explaining that those terrifying vibes were causing all customers to alienate and distance themselves, which drove him to take the decision to completely renovate the decor of the place to become more welcoming. Elisha asked him curiously if sales had improved after this renovation. William coughed nervously, admitting with bitter irony that the problem might not have been in the interior decor to begin with. Elisha thought that customers might have been feeling afraid of a specific employee, and not of the guild president himself, so she asked him frankly if there was another member working in the guild besides him. William was shocked when she mentioned the name Alter, wondering to himself if she meant that specific person. William agreed with her with a nervous laugh, admitting that Alter indeed seemed scary, while Elisha attributed people's fear of him to his constant wearing of dark black clothes. Then Elisha changed the course of the conversation, explaining that the real reason for her coming was to make two specific requests. William showed his interest and readiness to listen to what she had to say. Elisha explained that her first request was for him to introduce her to someone who could work as an outside weapons consultant, admitting she didn't have the right connections for that. So William inquired if she was looking for a weapons expert. William placed his hand on his chin in thought, telling her that no one came to mind at the moment, but he promised to let her know if he thought of anyone suitable. Then he asked her about her second request, and Elisha seemed to be gathering her thoughts before speaking. Elisha stood up ready to leave, announcing that she was leaving the two requests in his trusted hands. Before she left, William asked her about the condition of her grandfather, Mr. Michael. Elisha paused for a moment, then a cold smile formed on her face, and she reassured him that her grandfather was fine and in excellent health. As she was opening the door to leave, she suddenly bumped into someone, letting out a faint cry of surprise. She looked up to find herself face to face with Alter, who coldly commented on her constant busyness. He added that she was so busy that she walked without looking ahead. She looked at him in shock, wondering why he was in this place. Then her look turned into a sly smile, and she asked him if he had known about her coming and waited specifically for her. Alter answered with annoyed features that he belonged to this guild and that their meeting was just a coincidence. So she replied that she would believe him. This made him think to himself how her words carried an unexpected sting. Elisha confirmed to herself the truth of his being a member of the Information Guild and left the place. She noticed that he was walking behind her in the dark street. She turned towards him with an annoyed tone, inquiring why he was following her, while wondering in secret if he was angry because she seemed surprised by his presence. As she was backing away while talking, she hit something solid and fell to the ground, groaning. She discovered that she had bumped into a large statue and grumbled angrily about its presence in the middle of the street. Alter reached out his hand to help her up, reminding her that he had warned her before to watch her path. But she replied to him angrily that this wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been following her. Alter grabbed her bag and said they were going, and when she asked him where they were headed, he told her they were heading to her pawn shop. Elisha was surprised and asked him why he was going there, and he replied that he had business in her shop. Then he approached her, whispering and reminding her that there was an unsettled matter between them. Elisha immediately remembered what happened at the auction when she asked to hire him for an hour. Elisha told him she was wondering why he was following her. Alter replied that she was misunderstanding again, but reassured her that it wasn't about that. Elisha was surprised by his words and denied that she was thinking of anything like that, but Alter replied that her facial features were about to expose her. Then he gave her a serious look and asked her if something bad had happened to her. His question confused her, but he confirmed that his question was directed to her personally. Alter justified his question by saying he only caught a quick glimpse, but he noticed her bag was full of defensive magical tools, which piqued his curiosity. He added that as a member of the Information Guild, it was his duty to know if any shop owner on Ashen Street had been harmed. Elisha replied indifferently, denying that anything had happened, and explained she only thought it was good to buy some self-defense tools in advance because she might need them someday. Alter wondered if it would be better for her to hope she never had to use such things, but she replied that enemies could appear at any time, and that advanced preparation is better than later regret. He looked at her suspiciously, repeating his question about whether she was truly sure nothing had happened. After a moment of thought, Elisha admitted that thinking about it, something had indeed happened on the day she met him at the auction house. Alter recalled that day in his mind when his assistant Milton told him he heard the sound of crying through a magical eavesdropping device. But Elisha laughed as she made up a story, claiming that water was leaking from the upstairs ceiling, something she was sure she had paid to fix a long time ago. She continued that she rushed to buy materials and worked hard to fix it herself, proudly asserting that it was now strong enough to withstand even a hurricane. Alter suddenly interrupted her to ask seriously if the pawn shop was so precious to her that she would cry bitterly if any small thing went wrong with it. Elisha hesitated for a moment before answering in the affirmative. While he seemed lost in thought, Elisha noticed that he seemed different than usual and felt that this difference was real. He asked her why she was staring at him, and she replied that she was wondering why he hadn't left yet. Alter turned to leave, leaving her in a state of confusion. After they entered the shop, Elisha suggested they discuss the matter of his compensation, explaining she had asked William and that simple requests start at 100,000 gold pieces. She offered him 200,000 gold pieces, including the success fee for the auction case, but he interjected, saying there was something else he wanted to say first. He told her that the Information Guild's services were not limited to providing information only, which sparked her surprise. He explained that they also provide services for requests, arrangements, and personnel mediation, and that she could request guards or security personnel if she needed them. He added sarcastically that this service is available even when her shop's ceiling collapses. So Elisha realized with a bright smile that all this was a promotional offer for their services. She thanked him cheerfully and promised she would call him the next time a leak occurred. Then he took the initiative to ask her what she was requesting from the Information Guild earlier. and she replied that it wasn't anything important. She explained that she only asked them to introduce her to someone knowledgeable about weapons and to inform her of any rumors circulating in the noble society. But in truth, she had disguised her request to look like research into noble fashion trends for her business, while her real goal was to monitor Roseanne's movements. She realized that if she requested a direct investigation into Roseanne, the news might reach her ears. Alter surprised her by saying he would accept that request. She asked him in wonder if he meant he would tell her about the noble society's rumors, but he denied that. He reminded her that they were discussing compensation, then presented his simple condition, which was that she should consult him on everything related to weapons. Elisha jokingly thought that if she needed an excuse to see him, this certainly wouldn't be the way, then laughed the idea away. Elisha thought that this offer must mean one of two things. Either he desperately wanted to see the weapons collection on the second floor, or he still didn't believe she didn't deal in stolen goods. But although the offer seemed good, she met it with a smile and decided to reject it. Alter was surprised by the rejection and asked her the reason for this decision. She explained her business logic to him. Even if the commission fees were limited, the consultation fees would be continuous. And according to the shop's policy, they must be paid, meaning the loss would increase over time. Then she asked him with a hint of sarcasm if he intended to work for free, which made him reply with annoyance that she was making it look like he had ulterior motives. But Alicia thought to herself that initial rejection makes negotiations easier, and that accepting his offer without any doubt would be a form of foolishness. She added another argument, which was that she didn't even know his skill level yet, for him to repeat her words in surprise. So she suggested that they try some cases temporarily first, and if the results were satisfactory, they could then sign a formal contract. Alter sighed, commenting on her insistence on setting terms, but in the end he agreed to her suggestion, considering it wouldn't be a problem. Elisha was surprised by his quick agreement, as she thought he was the type whose pride would prevent him from accepting so easily. But he looked at her with a confident smile, assuring her that he was confident in his abilities and that she would be completely satisfied with the results. Elisha was flustered by his confidence, so he quickly clarified that he meant his skills. She replied that she knew. That then told him she would contact him if she had any request, and made to leave, but he stopped her. He asked her to tell him her name. She replied cheerfully that she thought he already knew it, but he wondered how he could know when they hadn't exchanged names before. Elisha winked at him, reminding him that he belonged to the Information Guild, and asked him if he wanted to hear the name directly from her mouth. Severe annoyance appeared on his features, so Alicia thought to herself that she shouldn't overdo provoking his anger. Then she smiled a bright smile and told him her name was Alicia. Alter nodded his head, sufficing with saying that he understood. When he turned to leave, Alicia was surprised that he didn't tell her his name, even though she already knew it from the business card he left. But she suddenly called him before he departed, to tell him his white shirt looked great on him. He stopped for a moment, and it seemed as if the compliment had pleased him before he continued on his way. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the emperor of the Breslave Empire was absent from the political scene. After the great shock he suffered following the recent death of the empress, the emperor decided to go on a holy pilgrimage to heal his heart. The person who took over the affairs of government in his absence was Marquis Crudel, who became the regent, while Marquis Crudel was walking through the palace halls amid the greetings of those present. One of his assistants informed him of matters needing his review, but the Marquis mentioned that he enjoyed drinking tea today with some old friends for the first time in a while. Then he added in a serious tone that one of the Viscountesses had raised a very troubling story. She claimed that there were unqualified people forging permits and selling undocumented goods. A sly smile formed on the Marquis's face, and he said that upon thinking about it, he realized the permit template had not been reviewed or changed for hundreds of years, making his assistant wonder if he was suggesting adopting a new permit template. The Marquis acknowledged the correctness of his assistant's words, but added that there was an additional condition, which was that new permits would only be issued to those who have a sponsor. A wicked smile appeared on his face as he explained that in this way, even if illegal shop owners fled, there would still be someone they could arrest and hold accountable. He issued his orders that the sponsor must be either a first-degree relative or a nobleman who testifies to their presence for the validity of the application. Then he tasked the Imperial Temple Knights with the mission of implementing these laws, sarcastically commenting that they had nothing to do anyway, which his assistant agreed to with hesitation and fear. The Marquis placed his hand on his chin, thinking that the first target for implementing these measures would be that specific place. It was Ashen Street, which he described as the capital's dirty and dangerous shadow. At that time, one of the customers in Elisha's shop was expressing her surprise at a postage stamp being sold for 800,000 gold pieces. So Elisha confirmed to her that this was natural given its rarity, as only 1,000 copies were issued on the occasion of His Majesty the King's birthday, and a collector had bought it with great enthusiasm. The customer expressed her happiness because she had offered the stamp for sale on consignment, instead of leaving it to collect dust in the storage. Elisha encouraged her to bring other stamps, as there might be another treasure among them, which the customer promised to do with enthusiasm. After the customer left, Elisha felt overjoyed. Selling an item at this price meant her share alone was 80,000 gold pieces. While she was recording in her logs, she thought that the shop's profits had already exceeded 30 million gold pieces, and all that remained now was to grow this money, meaning she could start investing soon. After a busy working day, she hung a closed sign on the door and began cleaning the shop, but she was interrupted by a voice at the door, where one of the employees was asking her if she was already closing the shop. So Elisha replied that the closure would be for today only. She explained that there was a general meeting of Ashen Street merchants because of the upcoming festival. The employee rejoiced to hear that, expressing her excitement for the Ashen Street festival. After the employee bid her farewell, Elisha began thinking about the festival matter, realizing there wasn't much a pawn shop could do during such an event, and that she had only one thing to do, which was to launch a free promotional campaign for festival visitors to attract them to the shop. She had already planned everything, and was confident that if her plan succeeded, customers would flock to the shop. Suddenly, a message arrived for her, and she deduced it was from William because she couldn't see its content. She sprayed a special powder on the paper to reveal the written words, but she was shocked by what she read, as the message stated that the palace would issue new permit templates for merchants, and that anyone who did not meet the new conditions would have their shop closed. The biggest problem was that the grace period given was very short, and that there was talk about Ashen Street being the first target. Elisha felt that what was happening was exactly similar to what happened with Hannah. It was the pretense of legality while planning something suspicious, something that can only succeed with the involvement of high-ranking figures. She wondered anxiously if Roseanne was trying to hatch some plot, targeting her shop this time. She immediately sent a message to William asking him to tell her who was behind this legal amendment. Then she sent another message to Hannah, telling her that merchant permits would be amended, and asking her to let her know the new template in advance if she found out about it. Elisha sighed with annoyance, grumbling that these problems appear at a time when she is already busy. She seriously wondered why Roseanne would go to this extent. Then she remembered what Roseanne said after seeing her grandfather collapse before her, as she laughed, commenting that it would always end this way. Elisha wondered to herself if Roseanne harbored an inferiority complex towards her grandfather, especially since it is said that the reunion family declined after her grandfather's departure. She felt a sense of bitterness because, without knowing anything, she left her grandfather to live with that woman for 3 whole years. While she was drowned in her thoughts, she was interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell, and a handsome blonde young man entered and asked her if she had finished her work for today. He explained that he would like to take a look at what was in the shop. Elisha was dazzled by his brilliant appearance and felt as if he had stepped out of a fairy tale. She regained her composure and welcomed him, explaining that she was about to close, but she invited him to check the shop, thinking that he probably wouldn't stay long. The young man bowed politely before her, so Elisha thought that it was not easy to turn away a customer with this appearance. He looked like a prince from fairy tales. This made her wonder in confusion why a man like him would come to a pawn shop, especially since his clothes looked like a formal uniform for a knight. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind, and she remembered what her grandfather had told her before about knights sometimes coming to request cooperation in investigations. So she immediately decided to prepare her business card. The young man approached her, which caused her to be flustered for a moment. He asked her if she was the shop owner, which she confirmed to him. He looked at her closely and then said he understood the matter. But he surprised her with a sharp question, inquiring about the permission under which she works in this place. Elisha was shocked by his manner, and wondered to herself if this man was a thug and not a knight. Then she thought sarcastically that this might be her chance to test her new magical tool. But she laughed and answered him that this building is private property, so there is no need for permission. The young man ignored her answer and confronted her with another question, accusing her of trading in sacred relics and inquiring whether she had reported this trade to the World Tree Temple. Elisha realized that the law theoretically requires reporting all cases related to sacred relics, but 500 years had passed since that law was issued. It had now become just a neglected law that no one followed, especially with the loss of many relics that were in the temple's possession, and the appearance of new relics that replaced them. The temple could no longer manage each piece individually. The young man deduced from her silence that she had not reported to the temple, but she firmly interrupted him, denying that she had given him any answer. Then she placed a massive ledger before him, explaining that she had kept all documents since the shop opened on February 7th, 912 of the imperial calendar, including records of reporting sacred relics trade to the temple. While he was browsing the ledger, Elisha wondered in confusion how this man knew of the existence of a sacred relic in her shop. She realized that the only relic currently present was the necklace Rena left. Suspicions arose within her that this man might be a follower of that uncle who was pursuing the necklace. The young man closed the ledger and told her that he had verified the records. Elisha asked him if he would now apologize for his groundless suspicion, but he answered in the negative, justifying that there would be more to apologize for later, so he would suffice with postponing the apology for the time being. Then he coldly ordered her to open the door. The blonde young man ordered Elisha to open the door leading to the second floor, threatening to break in by force if she didn't do so by the count of 3. Elisha looked at him with annoyance, thinking to herself that a true knight shouldn't act in such a crude manner. She then remembered that Rena's necklace was hidden on that floor, and at that moment, a blue magical ball was thrown towards the knight. Elisha immediately realized it was a tool that launches a rope to bind the opponent upon impact. The ball rolled on the ground without doing anything, so Elisha decided to feign complete ignorance, justifying it to herself that he hadn't revealed his true identity yet. Elisha feigned features of shock and confusion as if she didn't understand what was happening. But the knight glared at her with a cold look, accusing her of trying to hide the evidence. Then he moved with quick steps, trying to storm the door. So Elisha rushed in front of him, shouting at him to stop, and warning him that damaging the second-floor door without legal justification is considered destruction of property. He looked at her coldly and asked her to open the door herself then. So she replied that she really wanted to, but there was a problem. With a foolish smile and a slight feigned slap to her head, she claimed she had lost the key to the second floor. The trick didn't fool the knight, who told her this was an additional reason for her to step aside so he could open it himself. Elisha dropped her claims and stood firmly before him, asking directly whether he was looking for a sacred relic. The knight asked if that would change anything. She initiated a question about how he knew of the relic's existence in her shop. Elisha smiled confidently while looking at his magical necklace, hinting that she deduced he was using a magical tool to detect sacred relics. The knight replied that he was not obliged to tell her anything, so she replied with a sarcastic smile, considering that a wonderful thing. The knight thought she had surrendered, so he asked if she would open the door now, but she told him she would be the only loser if she continued to resist. Elisha smiled brightly and coldly asked him to return with a formal search warrant. She added seriously that he must also bring evidence, or at least a statement or a report letter justifying his intrusion. The knight arrogantly claimed that the rights granted to him were above individual property rights. So Elisha challenged him, asserting that they would settle this matter in court. With an angry look, she insisted on her request to bring the search warrant, threatening him that she would summon all the neighborhood residents if he didn't retreat. The knight advanced towards her, ignoring her warnings, so Elisha had no choice but to push him by his arm forcefully, but she was surprised to see him backing away in pain. Elisha stood in a state of complete amazement, wondering in confusion why he was holding his head even though she only pushed his arm, and she began to suspect he was faking a sham injury. Sweating and holding his head, the knight asked her in pain about the type of magical tool she used against him, claiming her attack was so fast he didn't notice it. Elisha was shocked by his accusation and asked in amazement what he was talking about, but he continued his accusations, saying her attempts to hide the matter made her look more suspicious. Elisha flew into a rage and started pulling her hair in frustration, thinking that he wasn't just faking an injury, but blaming her too, and that his pained facial expressions would make anyone think she was the one in the wrong. This tense situation was interrupted by a man's voice from behind, sarcastically pointing out that the knight was the one issuing threats and talking nonsense, so Elisha turned around surprised. This newcomer was none other than Alter, who stood wondering what the knight was doing in the shop. Alter and the blonde knight exchanged hostile and silent looks, each of them assessing the other sharply. Alter broke the silence, ordering the knight to leave if he was done with his nonsense, and warning him that he would be the one to summon everyone as Elisha had previously threatened him. The knight realized the situation was no longer in his favor, so he regained his composure and announced that he would return at a later time. Before he left, he turned towards Elisha, directing a final warning to her that he wasn't finished with her yet, and asserting that no matter how hard she tried to hide the matter, he would track it to the end. After the blonde knight left with heavy steps, Elisha collapsed on the ground from the intensity of tension and exhaustion. Alter approached her, asking anxiously whether she was okay and whether that man had caused her any harm. So she reassured him that she hadn't come to harm, but was just feeling tense. Alter reached out his hand to help her up, and she responded to him while wondering in confusion about the reason for his initiative to extend his hand to her. Alter noticed her surprise and coldly commented that she was talking nonsense again. Alter stepped back a little, denying her claim, and asserting that he didn't do anything of the sort, and asked her not to jump to conclusions with her assumptions. Curiosity pushed her to ask him whether he knew that man who just left, noting that they seemed as if they knew each other. Alter calmly admitted that he knew him a little. This increased her confusion, so she asked him suspiciously whether that man was a real knight or just someone disguised in knight's clothing, so Alter confirmed his identity as a knight. Elisha marveled at his answer and asked sarcastically whether it was common for knights to speak in a style resembling gentle delinquents. Then she quickly corrected her words to confirm he was just a delinquent and not gentle at all, which provoked a slight discontent in Alter. Alter explained to her that not all knights act in that way, so Elisha seized the opportunity to express her thanks to him for his intervention and help. She explained that her thanks were not just a courtesy, but because she realized that from his point of view, he must have felt annoyed by a stranger's attempt to storm the second floor, which he himself hadn't seen yet. Elisha paused for a moment, then changed the course of the conversation, wondering about the reason for his coming here at this time. Alter directed his question, clearly inquiring about what that knight was looking for. Elisha feigned innocence, answering that he only asked her to open the second floor immediately. But Alter caught her off guard, confirming that the knight was looking for a sacred relic, which made her realize with shock that he had overheard their conversation from outside. Elisha wondered to herself with annoyance about the reason for him asking the question since he knew the answer in advance. Alter continued to press her, wondering whether she really didn't know which specific sacred relic he was looking for. His persistence sparked her suspicions about the reason for his extreme curiosity. She linked the events in her mind, thinking that Rena's uncle was looking for the necklace, and wondered if he had submitted a request to the Information Guild, which meant Alter was looking for it too. Based on this conclusion, she decided she couldn't give any information to Alter, so she answered him coldly and claimed she hadn't heard anything about this matter. To distract him, she went back to talking about the knight, noting that at first she had high hopes for him because he looked like a sparkling prince from fairy tales, but in the end he only acted in a scary way. Alter was stunned by her describing him as a prince, so she confirmed to him with a smile that he looked like a prince riding a white horse from Tales. Elisha felt internal satisfaction for her belief that her acting of innocence had succeeded in distracting him, although she felt that her image before him had started to look strange. Suddenly, a ringing sound reached her ears, alerting her to an important matter, making her scream in horror, remembering she had completely forgotten about the General Merchants' Assembly. She started gathering her papers in a hurry, thinking aloud that there was much to discuss regarding the festival, and hoping they wouldn't refuse her presence just for being late. While she was looking at the paper that reached her previously, something caught her attention that made her stop in complete amazement. Meanwhile, Alter ignored her confusion and asked her whether that meant the knight hadn't mentioned his exact reason for coming, but she was completely absent-minded regarding what she was holding in her hands. Elisha interrupted him, calling him in his capacity as a customer, and apologized to him politely, wondering if they could postpone this talk for next time. She looked at him with serious features and told him clearly that a very urgent matter had just arisen, and she had to deal with it immediately. Elisha sat behind her desk to read the paper that reached her carefully, to discover that the new permit template contains only one change compared to the old template. When she scrutinized the text, it became clear to her that the amendment states that to obtain approval, the applicant must be either a first-degree relative or have the guarantee of a nobleman who testifies to their presence for the validity of the application. She realized the gravity of the situation, so she slapped her hands on the table with emotion, then picked up the paper and rushed out of the shop quickly. Meanwhile, Alter was sitting in his headquarters contemplating the magical tool he left for Alicia in the form of a business card, thinking that the matter was really strange. He recalled in his mind the words he eavesdropped on when the knight was talking to Alicia about the sacred relics trade, reporting it, and forced execution. Alter wondered about the reason that led to that magical tool's sudden failure, explaining to himself that it is designed to transmit sound upon touch, and wondering at the way any person would handle a business card for it to end up smashed in this form. Then his thoughts turned towards the man who was with her, who was none other than Eileen Hugo Radian, the leader of the Imperial Holy Knights. Alter thought that the leader didn't recognize him, but he seemed as if he sensed something. An illogical question grew in him regarding the motive that makes someone of Eileen's status search himself for a sacred relic inside a pawn shop. His eyes widened suddenly when the possibility occurred to him that the intended relic was the holy sword Rougenot. Alter concluded that from the Empire's perspective, obtaining the sword Rougenot is undoubtedly tempting, but it is impossible for the Empire to be aware that it was stolen in the first place. He continued his analysis, estimating that even if Ivor smuggled the sword to the Empire, there would be no justification for the leader of the Holy Knights to search for it personally. Alter grabbed his head, wondering if he was focusing his thinking excessively on the sword Rougenot, suggesting that the talk about the sacred relic might be just a pretext, and that the leader might have been hiding another goal behind his visit. Alter remembered another point that sparked his surprise, which was the moment Elisha grabbed the leader's arm, for the latter to retreat holding his head from pain, and he wondered about the type of magical tool the girl used, and even he couldn't discover it, and why the leader seemed pained from just a touch from her. Alter concluded that someone at the level of the leader of the Knights wouldn't fall victim to an ordinary magical tool this easily, so he stood up from his seat firmly, deciding that his next step must be to investigate the leader of the Holy Knights first. Returning to Elisha, she had finally reached the General Merchants' Assembly, where everyone was gathered around a long table. She opened the door, panting heavily, so the guild head welcomed her presence. The guild head noticed her breathlessness, so she asked her with a smile whether she had run all the way to get here. Elisha returned the greeting quickly, but soon presented the paper in her possession to the guild head named Mrs. Helena, asking her to take a look at it immediately. Mrs. Helena looked at the paper with features covered in seriousness and concern and asked her if this information was confirmed and its source reliable. Elisha nodded her head, confirming to her the truth of what was stated in it with complete confidence. Then, Mrs. Helena requested the attention of all those present and announced the temporary postponement of the planned festival agenda today, which sparked the merchants' surprise. When they asked her for the reason for this sudden decision, she explained to them that a more urgent and dangerous matter had just arisen. Mrs. Helena began to explain, noting that some might have already heard rumors stating that the merchant license template will be amended soon. She confirmed that the details related to this amendment are very dangerous, as the new amendment states that approval requires either a first-degree kinship or the presence of a nobleman who sponsors the merchant, which sparked gasps of shock among the audience. A state of panic and anger prevailed among the merchants, and one of them complained crying about being informed of a case of this magnitude in this sudden way, while another shouted angrily that this decision means practically closing the shops of all who do not have family or relations with the nobles. In the middle of this chaos, Elisha was certain within herself that this act carries the fingerprints of Viscountess Roseanne, for she is the only one who might resort to such base methods, and she concluded that she was plotting to drive her grandfather out of the market. Elisha clenched her fist in anger, denouncing the extent of this woman's cruelty who took an entire street hostage just to get at one old man. She reminded herself of the necessity to stay cohesive and maintain her calm in order to protect her grandfather and thwart these plots. Elisha realized that Roseanne's purpose was limited to one of two things, either forcing her to bring her grandfather to her or pushing her to beg her for help. She sighed with distress while placing her hand on her head, wondering to herself about the reason for the succession of problems and annoying matters on her lately. Her frustration increased until she started pulling her hair, for she was feeling very anxious regarding Rena's necklace, and thinking sadly about how to get rid of that knight whom she described as a gentle delinquent if he returned again. An idea flashed in her mind, which was that if she managed to obtain another sacred relic, she would be able to hide the necklace, so much so that she seriously wondered if she should sneak in and search the temple grounds to solve this dilemma. Her stream of thoughts was interrupted by a sudden welcome voice from someone who just entered, so she raised her head to look at him. She was surprised to see the young man Crescens who tried to rob her, who told her with a wide smile that he had returned to fulfill his promise, wondering if she remembered him. Elisha was struck by overwhelming shock and screamed in horror and anger at seeing him again. The young man grumbled with innocent features at her violent reaction, considering her facial expressions were harsh towards him. But she didn't care for his grumbling, but rather scolded him sharply, denouncing his daring as a thief to enter her shop with all insolence. In a moment of anger, Elisha turned a blue magical ball and threw it at him with all her strength. The ball hit him to explode and launch a glowing magical net, for Elisha to realize then that the tool was not broken as she previously thought. The young man fell to the ground while completely bound by the magical net, commenting with a nervous smile on this violent welcome. Elisha felt great relief and extreme happiness because her magical tool worked efficiently. She grabbed the magical net strongly to ensure its stability and wondered anxiously if this net would dissolve. The young man smiled and assured her it wouldn't dissolve, adding he didn't even intend to try to untie it before her, and calling her by the title President. Then he asked her with playful curiosity about her plan and what she intended to do with him while he was bound in this way. Elisha asked him sternly about the real reason that pushed him to return to her shop. The young man justified his return by saying their first meeting was not successful, so he came to apologize and correct the misunderstanding that occurred between them. He confirmed to her seriously that he is not a thief, as she thinks, pointing to his bag to clarify that he brought with him evidence proving his innocence. Elisha pulled his bag skeptical of his claims about the evidence, while he begged her to untie his bound to speak comfortably, showing his extreme curiosity about several matters, but she ignored him and started searching the bag. She asked him coldly about the nature of this curiosity, so he answered in fascination that he wonders about the ability that enables her to evaluate and appraise sacred relics with that amazing speed. He reassured her that he is not a commercial spy, but rather his motive is just academic curiosity. And at that moment, Elisha took out from his bag a glass snow globe that looks like a sacred relic. Elisha looked at him with a terrifying look and asked him with biting sarcasm whether his keeping this sacred relic also stemmed from his academic curiosity. Then she lost her nerves completely and shouted in his face, fiercely demanding him to confess the place from which he stole this sacred piece. The young man retreated in fear inside his net, denying the charge of theft strongly, and denouncing that she should think him foolish enough to display to her something he had stolen. Elisha asked him suspiciously about the reason for his possession of such a precious thing, so he answered confidently, justifying it by saying he works in the field of sacred relics. Elisha tilted her head in confusion, wondering if his work meant he belonged to the temple. The young man smiled nervously and confirmed that to her, apologizing for not being able to delve into the details of his work at the present time. But his mysterious answer increased her suspicions, so she flew into a rage, accusing him that he had stolen another sacred relic from the temple, and that he was lying insolently to cover up his crime. Elisha kept the glass globe in her hand, refusing to return it, which made the young man stammer, wondering in shock about the reason for her seizing this piece too. Elisha glared at him firmly and told him sternly that she would return what he stole to its correct place. While she was about to leave carrying her bag, she warned him against thinking of making money from behind that piece, asserting she would take it herself to the temple. Before she went out, she ordered him to stay in his place without moving until she returned, threatening him with a harsh punishment that would make him cry. The door closed behind her, leaving the young man alone inside the magical net, where he expressed his relief because she would return the piece to the temple indeed. But soon other thoughts took control of him, wondering in confusion about the ability by which she was able to identify the sacred relic with that speed again. He recalled the fact that that glass globe was not classified as a sacred relic, except recently due to the difficulty of evaluating its energy, which makes her immediate recognition of it amazing. The young man smiled calmly, certain within himself that this ability of hers was no longer just a coincidence. The young man looked at his hands, accepting the idea of being treated as a thief once again, and justifying it by saying the temple's project to recover sacred relics is proceeding in complete secrecy, so this misunderstanding was inevitable. In a moment, he used his energy to break the magical net with complete ease, revealing in his secret that his true identity as a cardinal is a much bigger secret. The young man stood liberated from his bounds, remembering Elisha's order to him to stay and wait. But he headed towards the door to leave, thinking that he is a person who must return to the temple to perform his duties. The scene shifted to the luxurious imperial palace corridors, where the knight Eilon was walking with steady steps until he stopped before a large door. The knight knocked on the door, asking the princess's permission to enter, so the answer came from inside to allow him to open the door and step into the room. He approached the red-haired princess, who was sitting quietly, for her to ask him about the reason for his coming. The knight told her that her uncle, the regent, had passed by here and confirmed he would find the necklace, which sparked concern and shock in the princess's self. The princess recalled at that moment a sharp confrontation that gathered her with her uncle, where he asked her with extreme anger about the place she hid the necklace. He shouted in her face, demanding her to return his sister's necklace. But the princess retreated in fear and denied that the necklace belonged to his sister. With courage, she announced clearly that that necklace is her mother's inheritance. The uncle flew into a rage from her insolence and daring in replying to him. He ordered the maids to search the room looking for the emerald necklace, mocking her ability to hide it in a place difficult to reach. The maids turned the room upside down, searching for the necklace under the gaze of the helpless princess. The uncle shouted again in her face, wondering crazily about the place she hid it in, while the princess was confirming to him that she placed it in a place her uncle wouldn't be able to find ever. The uncle threatened her with extreme anger that he would search the entire palace, rather the whole empire if necessary, warning her that she wouldn't be able to hide the necklace forever. Returning to the present, the princess asked the knight Eilon hesitantly whether he had gone to search the gray area today, so he confirmed to her that he did so indeed based on the regent's orders. He added that he found there an old pawn shop run by a young woman. The princess grabbed her fist with extreme tension and asked him about the reason for telling her these details. The knight revealed to her seriously that the piece the regent ordered him to search for seems to be present in that place. The princess stood up from her place in a state of panic and shock, begging the knight and pleading for it not to be in his intention to execute her uncle's orders and hand over the necklace to him. The princess held the hand of Knight Elon, reminding him that he was the captain of the holy knights who had sworn to serve the imperial family. He replied that he had indeed pledged to dedicate everything to the empire. This prompted her to ask cautiously whether that meant he would follow her uncle's orders, since he was the one ruling the empire now. The knight knelt on his knee, explaining that the oath he took was to protect the Breslev bloodline until his last breath. However, he admitted the difficulty of protecting the place she wished to preserve, namely the pawn shop, which left the princess in shock. Then he stood up and asked her to rest well, turning to leave the room. After his departure, the princess placed her hand on her chest, having resolved to protect that place herself. The princess put on a hooded cloak, disguising herself in preparation to go out, and her identity was revealed as Katrina Breslev, the princess of the empire. Meanwhile, Alicia had arrived at the towering temple building, and she was amazed by its grandeur, which she hadn't noticed during her previous visit at night. She was thinking that when she returned to the pawn shop, that thief had already disappeared, and she wondered in confusion how he had managed to escape. In the temple courtyard, the voice of a priestess caught her attention, announcing to those present the discovery of a holy artifact for the first time. The priestess was holding a small statue in the shape of a bird, explaining that it embodied a bird dear to the world tree, which sparked the children's admiration for its beauty. Elisha looked at the statue with suspicion, as it did not seem like a holy artifact to her at all, despite what the priestess said. Shock took hold of her for moments, and she wondered to herself if the temple had fallen victim to a scam. Elisha approached the priestess and greeted her, then asked her directly if that statue was truly a holy artifact, and the priestess confirmed the matter. With feigned curiosity, Elisha inquired about the method they used to distinguish between genuine holy artifacts and others. The priestess smiled, admitting her ignorance of the formal institutional aspects of the matter. However, she added that she had heard of people forging holy artifacts sometimes, which made Elisha pretend to be surprised and ask her how that was done. The priestess explained that unlike genuine artifacts blessed directly by the world tree, forged artifacts are saturated with holy power using concentrated holy water. She continued that this method could be considered divine, but it remains different from the original holy artifact. Elisha realized the truth and concluded that the use of holy water was the reason why the unique color of the original artifact did not appear. The priestess added that the appraisal process to distinguish between the two types is very long and difficult for her to explain, so Elisha thanked her for the clarification. The priestess prayed for a blessing for Elisha and left with the children. Elisha stood thinking that they do not rely on visible light alone, but use other methods for verification. But she wondered anxiously whether they would believe her if she told them that an artifact that had already passed all these tests was actually a fake, especially since it was displayed to everyone. Despite her hesitation, she resolved not to stand idly by and watch a fake artifact be displayed with pride. She decided she would first accomplish the goal for which she came, and after that, she would tell them the truth. Elisha entered one of the temple halls where a priest received her and asked what service he could provide for her. She told him that she would like to know the procedures followed for borrowing a holy artifact. The priest looked at her scrutinizingly and asked her if she was an envoy from a bishop of another parish. Elisha replied in the negative, so the priest continued by asking if she was the daughter of one of the saints, but she seemed unsure of her answer and expressed her doubt about that. She was thinking in her heart that her grandfather did not believe in the world tree to begin with, and that considering him a saint would be a troublesome matter. Then the priest told her with a smile that in this case it was impossible for her to borrow a holy artifact. But Elisha interjected, explaining that according to what she had heard, there was another condition that qualified her for that, and she began searching inside her bag. Then she took out the glass globe she had taken from the young man, explaining that the condition was for the person to provide a great contribution to the World Tree Temple. She asked hopefully as she presented the glass globe whether returning a stolen holy artifact did not count as a sufficient contribution. The priest was struck with shock, and admitting that this piece was indeed a holy artifact owned by the temple, he asked her in bewilderment why it was in her possession. He was fully aware that this piece had been stolen yesterday. Suddenly, the priest called the guards in a loud voice and pointed toward Alicia, ordering them not to allow her to escape, which left her in shock and bewilderment. Panic seized her as she wondered to herself if they really thought she had stolen it, and then returned with such insolence to give it back. 2 guards grabbed her, and she thought that if she had brought the real thief with her, the problem would have been solved easily. But she realized they did not intend to listen to her, and she doubted they would believe her even if she told them about the fake holy artifact displayed outside. At that moment, a mysterious person appeared wearing a white cloak and a purple robe, with his face completely covered. Elisha wondered about his identity and whether he was even able to see at all. The guards bowed in respect to him as he advanced toward her, and he began communicating with her by writing on a paper. He wrote a greeting to her, expressing his happiness at meeting her in this situation, which made her wonder if he had taken a vow of silence. Then he offered her a written apology on behalf of the guards for their misconduct, and asked her, confirming whether she had come to return a holy artifact, pointing to the glass globe she was carrying. She told him that it was in the possession of a thief, and she saw it was better to return it. She thought to herself that he carried a strange sense of humor. The man wondered how she knew it was a holy artifact, and whether the thief himself told her that. She answered that she worked in a pawn shop and had some knowledge of appraisal. Then he caught her off guard with another written question about her ability to appraise a holy artifact with such accuracy. Elisha thought that she knew the matter from the color of the light, but she realized that this was something everyone knew, and that she possessed a better ability to sense the matter. In order not to seem boastful, she recalled her grandfather's advice, who taught her to always be careful when appraising, but that she must trust her intuition sometimes. With a warm smile, she answered him that her grandfather had taught her a lot. He wrote to her that he had understood, then returned to the subject of her original request, which was borrowing a holy artifact. In appreciation of her initiative in returning the stolen piece, he decided to allow her to borrow another artifact for a specified period, which overwhelmed her with happiness and moved her to thank him warmly. Before she departed, she whispered to him about the bird-shaped holy artifact in the exhibition hall, suggesting that he reevaluate it again. She expressed her explicit doubt about it being a genuine artifact, so he wrote back answering that he would do so, and thanked her for her advice. Elisha felt relieved because he was an open-minded priest. Meanwhile, the first priest returned and offered her his apology for his misconduct, and she met his apology with understanding. Then he guided her to accompany him in order to complete the procedures for borrowing the holy artifact. The mysterious priest handed her a paper on which he wrote that he would send someone to her workplace soon because he might need her help personally, and asked her to receive them naturally this time. Elisha wondered to herself about his intended meaning for the word natural, assuming he did not want her to act formally just because they were priests. Then she smiled a broad smile and expressed her agreement, welcoming their visit at any time. As she was leaving, she thought that if she could build a good relationship with the temple, she might obtain holy water at a cheaper price. The mysterious priest waved to her, bidding her farewell while he smiled. As soon as she left, the identity of the mysterious man was revealed, who was none other than Cardinal Crescens, and he immediately issued orders to remove the bird-shaped crystal statue. Then he ordered that the appraiser who examined that piece be brought to him. He assured himself that in this way he had paid for the appraisal, promising another meeting. Elisha left the temple carrying the holy artifact she borrowed, and she noticed its light was a bit dim, but she convinced herself that a holy artifact remains a holy artifact. She found herself walking in a quiet garden and wondered if this was the holy sanctuary. Although under her grandfather's influence, she did not believe in gods. She felt grateful to the world tree that granted her a second chance at life and pledged to live while doing good. Then she decided to ask for one very small wish. She wished with pain and hope that her grandfather would never forget her. Meanwhile, her grandfather was sitting alone in his bed. One of the maids entered carrying his medicine and the newspaper for him. He coldly ordered her to leave the items and depart, but she apologized, explaining that she must make sure he takes the medicine completely before she can leave, so he agreed with her. He smiled bitterly, commenting that his memory was no longer as it was. After she watched him take the medicine, she made sure he had emptied the cup completely. Then she hurried to depart. The grandfather thought to himself that they considered him an evil moneylender, and that this was suitable for him, for in that way they wouldn't notice that he was switching the cups. He recalled the memory of Alicia asking him for the shop's seal, pledging to protect it no matter what. Then he opened the window and poured the poisoned medicine out, whispering in his heart and reassuring her not to worry and to rest well. He added that she must protect the shop and protect herself as well. Elsewhere, the sorceress Emma was talking with Elisha, wondering if the deadline for finding a sponsor was midnight tonight, and expressed her relief because they discovered the matter in advance thanks to her. Elisha asked her if she had a sponsor, and Emma replied in the affirmative. She added proudly that about whether her grandfather Michel would come today, which left Elisha in confusion and hesitation. Elisha answered with a forced smile, explaining that her grandfather was in a distant place and wouldn't be able to attend on time. Emma wondered about her next step, so Elisha reassured her that she would find someone else to help her. Emma expressed her full confidence in Elisha's ability to manage the matter. Then Emma changed the course of the conversation, inquiring about the reason for her visit and whether she needed another magical tool, which Elisha denied. Alicia extended her hand while carrying the blue magical ball and told Emma that she thought the product she bought was defective. Emma was struck with shock and shouted, denouncing the idea of a defect in her products, asserting that the word defective was impossible in her dictionary. Emma took the ball to examine it closely and confirmed there was nothing wrong with it. But Elisha explained to her that when she tried to use it the first time, nothing happened at all. And the second time, the man she caught managed to untie the net himself and escape. After a moment of reflection, Emma realized the true cause of the problem. She revealed to the shocked Elisha that the tool had been subjected to interference from a holy power, and that she felt as if holy water had been poured over it completely. The matter did not stop there. Emma pointed out the existence of another strange thing. Both of the men Elisha faced were indeed strange. Then she reached a dangerous conclusion, that one of these two men possesses something he should not possess. Later, while the atmosphere was charged with the spread of nights everywhere, the scene was interrupted by sudden news reaching Alicia. For her to be surprised by Alter appearing before her suddenly, she received him with wonder and asked him for the reason for his coming, explaining that there were no weapons awaiting his consultation yet. Alter answered her that he did not come to request a consultation. Rather, he came to talk about the knight who visited her last time. Alicia smiled playfully while describing that knight as a brilliant and polite delinquent. Alter wondered about the reason for her insistence on using the word brilliant, and before he surprised her, he asked her not to be shocked, then revealed to her that that man is a holy knight. Elisha did not seem completely surprised, so he asked her if she knew that. She answered that she knew that man seemed extraordinary in several ways, but he caught her off guard with another question about whether she also knew that he was the captain of the Imperial Holy Knights, which struck her with overwhelming shock, and she wondered in bewilderment if that was true. This revelation made her wonder in confusion about the identity of Rena's uncle and the extent of his influence that allows him to issue orders to the captain of the Holy Knights. But more importantly, she suddenly remembered an important article she read in her previous life regarding the captain of the Knights at this specific time, so she began pulling her hair in emotion. Alter noticed her strong reaction and told her that he did not intend to provoke her to this extent. So she bowed before him and thanked him for informing her of this matter. Alter asked her if she had anything else to say, and she repeated her thanks to him for informing her. But he explained that this was not what he meant, and asked her directly if she did not intend to request help. Then he reminded her of what he said to her last time, which was that she could request help if she needed security or guards. Alter commented on the idea of a holy knight coming from the Empire to the pawn shop that Elisha values so much, but she smiled and told him that she would try to handle the matter herself for the time being, thanking him for his concern. Alter was surprised by her reply, so she confessed to him with a light laugh that she was frankly unaccustomed to receiving help. She added another justification, which was that she heard his employment fees were very exorbitant. Alter told her that she must practice receiving help today, and announced that he would stay in a corner of the shop, asking her to call him the moment she needed help, which made her seem surprised. With a smile full of gratitude, she agreed to his offer and thanked him. Their conversation was interrupted by a voice from the door, for the blonde knight to enter apologizing for the interruption. He advanced toward her and presented the search warrant she requested last time. While she was receiving it, he apologized for his delay in introducing himself, but she stopped in shock as she read the name written on the warrant. He bowed before her politely and introduced himself as Elon Hugo Ladien, captain of the Holy Knights in the Beryliev Empire. At that moment, Elisha realized the matter and remembered the reason why she had memorized a newspaper article about this man. She recalled in her memory an image of a horrific news report announcing the death of the captain of the Holy Knights, Elon Hugo Ladian, in a mysterious terrorist attack, and realized with shock that this man would die soon. He was found one night as a lifeless body, and his body had been completely torn apart. The scene was horrific, as if a monster had devoured him, despite the impossibility of such a monster roaming in the imperial palace. Even stranger, the crime scene was remarkably clean, except for some scattered black sand and glass shards. On that day, a loud explosion was heard near the captain's office, and based on the knight's testimonies, the belief prevailed that the incident was a terrorist attack carried out by a sorcerer. But the investigations did not find any trace of the use of mana or casting of spells by any sorcerer. Eventually, the case was closed as an accident that occurred during Eileen's attempt to use black magic. Thus, in one moment, the brightest sword in the imperial palace turned into a stain on the foreheads of all knights. The imperial palace's anger led to the immediate dissolution of the Holy Knight Squad, to be replaced by the men of the regent King Crudel. Back to the present, Alicia was thinking that this narrative does not seem logical at all, wondering whether someone of his status would commit an act that might lead to his decapitation inside his private office. She also found that the course of events after the incident was suspiciously smooth, as if someone had planned everything in advance. Her thoughts were interrupted by Captain Elon's voice as he asked her to show him the holy artifact in her possession. She woke from her distraction and agreed to his request, inviting him to follow her. She went up with him to the second floor and brought a small box from inside. Then she presented the box to him. He grabbed it and asked her to open the case. Elisha noticed that he was careful not to touch the holy artifact directly, so she realized in her heart that the sorceress Emma was right. She recalled the memory of her conversation with Emma when she told her that this man carries something he should not carry, for Elisha to ask her in confusion about what this thing was. The sorceress Emma revealed that the problem lies in the emission of mana magical energy from a person who possesses holy power, which is something that should not happen at all. Elisha recalled in her mind the glowing aura that surrounded the blonde knight at that time, wondering whether that emission resulted from his holy power. Emma explained that this person might have been forcibly injected with mana by someone, which led to his entry into a dangerous state known as mana poisoning. She concluded that given the high level of holy power he possesses, he must be a high-ranking priest or a holy knight, asserting that there is no foolish person who might dare to use magic directly against a person of this status. Based on that, Emma suggested that he might have been secretly exposed to mana stones, which made Elisha wonder in confusion how someone could expose him to those stones without his knowledge. Emma explained the matter that the culprit must have hidden those stones in his daily items, that he uses constantly, explaining that one shard is not enough, and even if it were compressed, the quantity required to cause this effect must be enormous. Emma seriously warned Elisha against interfering in this matter as much as possible, noting that the one who hatched this plot is an extremely cruel and malicious person, for Elisha to inquire about the reason for this severe warning. Emma explained that a person suffering from mana poisoning suffers from severe and excruciating pain as soon as he approaches or touches any holy artifact or holy power. She added that the tragedy lies in the fact that this man possesses holy power within him, which means he endures pain beyond description every minute and every second of his life, which made Elisha feel great pity for him. Emma asked Elisha whether he seemed ill or in pain when she met him, and Elisha denied that completely, noting that on the contrary, he was extremely polite and composed. Emma considered this composure as categorical proof of the necessity to stay away from him, warning that a person capable of suppressing such terrible pain and hiding it must be dangerous and completely unnatural. Back to the present, Elisha was standing beside Captain Elon while carrying the box of the holy artifact, and she realized in her heart that his proximity to the artifact in this way must cause him terrible pain. Elisha sincerely wished that this situation would end quickly so that he could leave and stay away from the source of pain, while Captain Elon affirmed steadily that he had verified the artifact. The captain bowed before her politely, expressing his deep thanks for her cooperation with him. Elisha was surprised by his calm reaction, and wondered to herself in amazement whether the matter had really ended this simply without any hostile act from him. While he was about to depart, Elisha suddenly rushed toward him and grabbed his arm, asking him to wait for a moment, which made him flinch and retreat sharply, and signs of clear pain appeared on his features following her direct touch. Elisha withdrew her hand immediately and apologized to him with extreme concern for her haste. The captain grabbed his arm, trying to compose himself and hide his pain, while Elisha was thinking that at first she didn't intend to care for his condition, whether he was suffering from mana poisoning or not. But she remembered the information she recently obtained about the regent, Marquis Crudel, being the one who led the legal amendments related to permits after a suspicious tea session, and realized that the situation had changed now. Elisha concluded that if Elon agreed in opinion with the Regent Crudel, there would have been no reason driving the latter to try to harm the captain of the Holy Knights and get rid of him. Based on the principle that the enemy of her enemy is her friend, she decided that she must help him, and that the first step for that is to know how he was exposed to mana poison. But she wondered in confusion whether someone like him would reveal his weakness this easily, and of his own free will. She offered him again to examine the holy artifact more accurately to be sure, but he reassured her that the examination he performed was sufficient. He justified that by saying her possession of a permit from the temple proves beyond doubt that the artifact displayed is original and certified, while sweat was pouring from him and tension was apparent on him. Elisha noticed the paleness of his face and the badness of his condition, so she asked him with concern whether he felt a health malaise. But he insisted steadily that he was perfectly fine. The captain smiled a faint and suspicious smile, noting that as a holy knight, it is impossible for him to be in pain when exposed to holy power, as if he were trying to dispel her doubts. But Elisha did not hesitate and confronted him with a direct and frank question as to whether he suffered from a state of mana poisoning. The captain was struck with bewilderment and shock at her knowledge of this precise term and the truth of his hidden condition. Elisha quickly recovered the situation and claimed she read about an exactly similar case of a priest who suffered from mana poisoning in one of the ancient manuscripts she passed by. Elisha explained to Knight Elon how a mana stone was discovered hidden inside a pillow someone received as a gift, and asked him whether he had received any gifts recently. Elon recalled at that moment the image of a man wearing a formal suit as he presented a box containing an hourglass as a gift sent to the imperial palace before setting out on a pilgrimage journey. He remembered that the emperor personally was the one who carefully chose that gift to present to the captain of the Holy Knights. Elon's eyes widened in shock when he realized the possibility that that item specifically was what contained the mana stone that caused his condition. Elisha noticed his distraction and asked him if he had arrived at something, but he hurried to deny the matter completely as he shook his head. Elon was trying to convince himself that it was impossible for the emperor to commit an act like this to him, justifying that even if the matter were correct, there must be a valid reason behind that. In an attempt to change the subject, Elon asked Elisha whether she had managed to secure a sponsor for her shop, reminding her that the deadline expires by midnight tonight. Signs of frustration and tension appeared on Elisha's features, and she confessed that she was still working on the matter and that it was not an easy task. After finishing the inspection, Elisha suggested they go out of the rooms. And, as they were leaving, Elon placed his hand on his head in pain a bit and told her quietly that he knew someone who might be able to help her in the sponsor case. Elisha turned toward him quickly, and her face brightened with hope and surprise at his unexpected offer. Elisha asked him about his identity, but Elon ordered Elisha to wait and extended his arm toward her. This sudden intervention led to Elisha losing her balance, to retreat backward and stumble on the stairs. But before she fell, Alter caught her quickly and gracefully between his arms, holding her strongly under Elon's gaze. Alter stared angrily toward Elon, asking sharply what he thought he was doing causing this situation. Alter glared at Elon with a sharp look, accusing him of being a man who claims to be the captain of the Holy Knights, yet extends his hand to a civilian, while Elon was staggering, holding his head. Elisha looked with concern between the two men while still in Alter's arms, expecting a violent fight to break out between them at any moment. Alter put her down quietly to the ground, so Elisha hurried to intervene and try to calm the atmosphere, confirming to Alter that what he thought did not happen. Alter was not convinced by her justification and asked her with features covered in annoyance and anger to explain the meaning of this chaos to him. Elisha defended Elon, asserting that he did not touch her with the intent to harm, and that what happened was not stemming from his true intentions. She added with a look full of hope that Elon just told her that he knew someone who could help her in her crisis. Elisha thought in her secret that the knight is continuing to claim pain and damage when approaching her, so she decided to exploit the situation and play along to get his help. Alter interrupted her speech, describing her words as lying. Alter approached her, more wondering sharply about the reason for her attempt to protect that man, and whether she had really fallen in love with the knight as she always described him as brilliant. Elisha immediately denied the matter with extreme confusion, but Alter continued to besiege her with his looks and doubts. Alter placed his hand on his chest and asked her in a tone carrying a mixture of seriousness and jealousy whether she trusted this knight whom she had only met twice more than she trusted him. Elisha felt awe from his constant proximity and stepped back a step with fear and tension. In that decisive moment, Elon intervened and drew his holy sword, directing its blade directly toward Alter's neck, and demanded him sternly not to threaten her. But Alter did not show any sign of fear, but rather mocked the situation and pushed the sword blade with his finger coldly, noting that Elon was the one issuing the threat at the present time. The tension continued between the two men as Elon directed his sword toward Alter, but the situation was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a person wearing a black cloak, whom Elisha called, wondering if she was Rena. The girl pushed back her hood to reveal her red hair and green eyes, to reveal she was Princess Katrina, which struck Elon with extreme shock that pushed him to ask in bewilderment about the reason for her presence in this place. The princess ignored Elon's shocked question and directed her speech directly to Alicia, explaining she came only to be reassured about the safety of the security she left with her. The princess approached Elisha, apologizing for not possessing money at the present time due to her going out in haste, but she promised her to bring the fees next time. Then she reassured Elisha and told her not to worry about the matter of finding a sponsor for her shop. Their gazes met, and the princess realized from Elisha's reaction that Elon had already told her that there was someone who would help her, expressing her surprise that the knight had revealed the matter in advance. The princess put her hood back with a light smile and told Elisha that she would understand everything by nightfall. Then she bid her farewell on the hope of meeting again and headed toward the door to depart, while Elon followed her silently. Elisha watched her departure as she emphasized they're looking forward to the next meeting. As soon as the princess left, Elisha suddenly lost her balance and nearly fell, if not for Alter's quick intervention, who supported her between his arms, wondering with concern about her condition. Elisha leaned on him with a tired smile, confessing that she feels complete depletion of her energy. Alter looked at her with features covered in annoyance, reminding her that this situation does not call for laughter, which she agreed with weakly. Elisha closed her eyes with fatigue, noting that she would take a nap for only 30 minutes. Justifying that although she strongly desired to surrender to sleep, she has work that must be accomplished. Alter sighed sarcastically as he held her to him, wondering in himself if she was planning to use him as an alarm clock to wake her up. In a moment of weakness, Elisha whispered in a faint voice, confessing to him that she was feeling extreme fear a while ago. Asserting that his presence beside her had granted her a feeling of relief, then she added that she would ask him for one last service. Later, Alicia fell into a deep sleep on her desk, while Alter stood contemplating her, marveling at the situation. Alter directed his gaze toward the ledger, considering this was the perfect opportunity to examine it. Alter pulled the ledger quietly and started turning its pages, thinking that if he managed to find any trace of the sorcerer Ivor here, his work in this place would end. After a thorough search, he closed the ledger with a sigh, surprised by his not feeling any disappointment, as if he had expected this result from the start. He looked at the sleeping Alicia and concluded in his heart that he perhaps already realized that this woman was completely innocent. Elisha repeated the muttering in her sleep, so Alter returned the ledger kindly under her head. At that moment, a faint flash emanated from Elisha's hand, for the magical tracking device in Alter's wrist to react with it suddenly. Alter's eyes widened in shock from this reaction, confirming to himself that Ivor had been present in this place. And very recently, since the ledger Alicia wrote was devoid of any trace of him, Alter concluded that the person who moved and covered up the matter must be the man she calls her grandfather. The scene shifted to Realm Province in the Eastern Empire, where Viscountess Roseanne was flying into a rage inside her palace, wondering crazily how they failed to find anything despite their search in the entire pine forest, while her husband tried to calm her. Roseanne shouted in her husband's face, "Nicholas Raum," denouncing his attempt to calm her in light of this situation, and she glared at him with a sharp look, confirming confidently that he must have overlooked something. The husband stammered, wondering about her intent, for she advanced toward him and pointed at him sternly, reminding him that he was the one who painted the imitation copy of the Cologne forest painting. Then she grabbed his shirt collar strongly and threateningly, demanding him to confirm whether he had erased or ignored any elements from the original painting, thinking they were unimportant. Nicholas defended himself while trembling, confirming to his wife Roseanne that he had copied the painting with extreme precision exactly as it was. But Roseanne flew into a rage and pushed him violently to fall on the floor, then ordered him sternly to leave her room immediately. Nicholas rose quickly and ran out of the room in a state of extreme panic. Roseanne sat on her seat exhausted as she placed her hand on her head, grumbling, describing him as a useless fool, and Roseanne sank into her thought, wondering at her uncle's not appearing on that day, even though the pawn shop he runs is about to close. A malicious smile formed on her lips as she was certain that once the shop went bankrupt, it would be only a matter of time before they could track and find him, assuring herself of the impossibility of that girl being able to secure a sponsor in this tight time. Her train of thought was interrupted by her brother's intrusion into the room quickly while sweating, calling her eagerly to tell her of an urgent matter. Roseanne glared at him with annoyance, wondering about the reason for his coming at this late hour of night, for he stammered as he told her that something had happened to their uncle's pawn shop. Her brother completed his shocking sentence, explaining that they had already found a sponsor and that the shop permit had been renewed, which sparked Roseanne's shock and bewilderment. Roseanne jumped from her seat in a raging anger, wondering disapprovingly about the identity of the person who would dare to sponsor that shop, for her brother to surprise her that the matter is not limited to the shop only, but that there is someone who came forward to sponsor the entire street. Roseanne did not believe what she heard and inquired in bewilderment about the meaning behind that, for her brother to tell her that the Imperial Princess Katrina Breslev had personally announced her sponsorship of all the street shops. Earlier that night, specifically a few hours before the end of the licenses, renewal deadline, the regent Marquis Crudel was meeting with his men in the Imperial Palace, where he inquired about the course of the Ashen Street shop's licenses renewal process, and one of his assistants answered him that only half of the shops managed to find sponsors, while the other half was unable to do so. Crudel issued his orders sternly to close any shop that fails to renew its license on that day and prevent it from opening its doors the next day. At that moment, Princess Katrina, who was sitting beside him, intervened. The princess wondered quietly whether satisfying the sponsor's existence condition was enough to renew the licenses, as the law stipulates. Crudel confirmed the correctness of her words, although he was grumbling in his heart from her insistence on attending this meeting, wondering contemptuously what a child like her could understand in these matters. The princess exploited his confirmation and announced clearly that in this case they could list her name, Katrina Breslev, in the sponsor field for all remaining shops, which sparked a wave of murmurs and bewilderment among those present in the hall. Crudel flew into a rage and struck his hand on the table strongly, scolding her sharply and demanding her to stop being absurd, noting that this council is not a place for her play, and calling her by her shortened name, Lena. The princess stood with loftiness and glared at him with a sharp look, reminding him that the one who forgets he is in a formal and public council is he and not she, which made Crudel struck by her daring in replying to him, and she firmly and seriously demanded him to stick to his limits and call her by her formal title as the Princess of the Empire. The next morning, the sorceress Emma broke into Elisha's shop with extreme enthusiasm, asking eagerly whether she had heard the latest news. Emma zapped the good tidings to Elisha, explaining that Princess Katrina had agreed to be the sponsor for all Ashen Street shops, expressing her great relief at this breakthrough in the crisis. Elisha smiled with relief and reassurance at no shop having to close, and realized then the true meaning behind the princess's words when she told her she would understand everything by nightfall. Emma wondered with curiosity about the motives that might make the princess take a decision like this, while Elisha sufficed with feigning lack of knowledge. But Elisha was guessing in her heart the real reason, wondering in amazement whether the princess had really taken this bold step for her sake. Suddenly, Emma clapped her hands as if she remembered an important matter. For Elisha to initiate her with a question whether the matter concerned the sorcerer she asked her to track previously, for Emma to confirm that enthusiastically. Emma explained she had not confirmed categorically yet, but one of her friends told her that the spell formula seemed familiar to him, which made Elisha breathe a sigh of relief. Elisha placed her hand on her chest, expressing her deep relief, confessing she was afraid Emma wouldn't be able to find any thread leading her to that sorcerer. Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell announcing the entry of a customer whom Elisha welcomed. Emma asked permission to depart to let Elisha start her work, and bid her farewell, waving her hand. While Emma was leaving the shop with quiet steps, she sank into her thought, contemplating Elisha's extreme enthusiasm regarding that sorcerer, and some doubts and questions haunted her about her true intentions. Emma wondered to herself shyly whether Elisha harbored feelings of admiration toward that sorcerer, but she suddenly stopped when she realized the fact that this sorcerer is in fact a girl. After a moment of thought, she smiled, considering it was okay, and that she perhaps was narrow-minded as a sorceress for not thinking of this possibility. At that time, Elisha was bidding her customers farewell kindly, wishing them a near return. While she was standing alone, she thought it would have been better if she had been able to find that sorceress first, and she started gathering her items in her bag, certain there was no stronger evidence than that sorceress's testimony to prove Roseanne's crimes. Nevertheless, she didn't despair, considering it was okay if she didn't find her now, for Roseanne has many people she exploits to achieve her aims. Alicia left the shop with confident steps, vowing in her secret that if Roseanne dared to touch her people, she would respond in kind and take Roseanne's followers as hostages with her. Elsewhere, inside an atelier in chaos, Nicholas Raum was painting with diligence and exhaustion, muttering the necessity of finishing this imitation painting by next week. He looked in despair at the accumulated paintings, realizing he must finish them all within a month. So much so that the paintbrush fell from his trembling hand. He supported his head with his hand, trying to focus, and fully aware that Roseanne would fly into a rage if he fell behind the set deadline. He covered his face with his hands in a moment of despair and collapse, confessing to himself that painting no longer granted him any feeling of pleasure as it was in the past. His moment of weakness was interrupted by a delicate feminine voice praising the magnificence of his painting, so he looked from between his fingers in surprise. He turned terrified to ask about the speaker's identity, to find Alicia standing behind him with a quiet smile. Alicia apologized kindly for her intrusion, justifying it by saying the beauty of the painting had attracted her and she couldn't stop herself from contemplating. Nicholas wondered in bewilderment and shock at how she was able to enter, even that he doubted for a moment he was imagining her presence. He looked at his painting with sorrow and told her in a broken voice that this painting was not of his pure creation, but rather it was just an imitation copy. Alicia pointed her finger toward another nearby painting, explaining she was talking about the beautiful painting on it. The painting carried a breathtaking painting of natural landscapes, which brought back to Nicholas dear memories. Tears poured from his eyes profusely, and he confessed in a tearful voice that he was feeling overwhelming happiness when he painted that painting on the plate. Alicia stood beside him, comforting him in silence, while he apologized for her having to see him in this miserable state. Alicia smiled at him and reassured him there was no need to apologize, thanking him for granting her the chance to enjoy seeing this beautiful art, to realize then that she is a real person talking to him. He asked her in wonder whether she knew his identity. Sure now she wasn't a ghost or hallucination. Alicia confirmed that to him with a smile, adding she believes he knows her grandfather too, which sparked his surprise and pushed him to ask about her grandfather's identity. Alicia extended her hand inside her bag and introduced herself with respect, saying her name is Alicia. Alicia took out a set of papers and handed them to him, explaining that the Duke, Michel Fouchidad Raunit, was the one who sent her to him. Nicholas looked at the papers in shock, so Alicia told him that these documents are her grandfather's will that clarifies what he left for her. While he was reading the documents, Alicia remembered the truth of Nicholas Raum, the painter who was born as a commoner, but caught Roseanne's attention to eventually become a son-in-law to her family. Roseanne exploited him to polish her image in high society as a lover of arts through her marriage to this unknown genius, while she was exploiting him in secret to paint imitation paintings. Regardless of the feelings Nicholas might have harbored for her, it was clear and obvious that Roseanne never loved him at all. Alicia recalled in her mind a dark scene from her previous life, where she remembered the tragic end of Lord Raum and how Roseanne had plotted his murder in cold blood. She also remembered how Roseanne's influence and power made the news of his death just a small and marginalized article in a corner of the newspapers, without sparking anyone's attention or suspicion. Among the bitter ironies that occurred to her mind, his true, breathtaking paintings and creations did not find the popularity and fame they deserved, except after his departure from this world. Back to the present, Lord Nicholas was sitting holding the papers Alicia handed him and signs of bewilderment marking his face, wondering sincerely and with lack of comprehension about the reason that might drive a person of the Duke's status to search for a man like him. Alicia answered him with a warm smile as she confirmed, handing him the documents, explaining that the Duke had expressed his explicit desire to invest in his buried artistic talent. These words fell on Nicholas's ears to spark his emotions strongly, for his eyes welled up with tears from the intensity of being moved, and he repeated in a quavering voice, wondering in disbelief whether this investment was directed to him specifically, to confirm to him that Alicia, and that this support will not be for the sake of the imitation paintings he was forced to paint, but rather it is a real investment in his original paintings and private creation, calling him by his title as proof of her full respect for his person and his authentic art.